If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon, link is in the description. Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200 plus audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon, link is also provided in the description.
Chapter 81 Familiar Reunion. Beyond the battlefield. Mika. Enhance. Healing drop, tears of light. Over limit dia fertile. Before even reaching Mika's side, Ermid, seeing him lying on the ground, swiftly activated a combination of Nen and magic. Brilliant light enveloped Mika, rapidly healing his wounds. As the excruciating pain that racked his body began to subside, a smile returned to Mika's face. Mika. Are you all right? Ermid rushed to his side, her eyes filled with worry. Sensing her concern and fear, Mika reached out and grasped her hand, a gentle smile gracing his lips. I was in trouble, but I'm fine now. After all, you're here with me. Ermid's anxiety immediately vanished, replaced by a blush that crept up her cheeks. Mika chuckled softly, observing her reaction. Then, he lifted his head slightly and saw Melly, her face edged with worry as well. Noticing her gaze, Mika pushed himself up with his left hand and sat up, leaning against a nearby rock. Melly. Yes. Melly, who had been standing frozen in place, quickly responded to Mika's call and beckoning gesture. She hurried over from behind Ermid and stood before Mika. Without hesitation, Mika reached out with his other hand and grasped her hand as well. If you're worried, come and check for yourself. How am I doing? Healing up nicely, right? Looking at Mika's rapidly recovering body bathed in brilliant light, Melly nodded shyly. It was worth noting that Mika and Melly were usually quite close, often seen with their arms around each other without a hint of embarrassment from Melly. However, under the current circumstances, even she couldn't help but blush. How sweet, Merlin sighed, observing the scene. He couldn't help but reminisce about his own past. Before entering Avalon, Merlin had been quite the womanizer. His romantic escapades were countless. Seeing this makes me wonder if I'm getting old, he mused, shaking his head. Nonsense. I'm the eternally beloved big brother. How could I possibly be old? Hearing Merlin's musings, Gabriel, floating in midair, suddenly regarded him with suspicion. I absolutely cannot let him corrupt Mika, she thought to herself, her resolve hardening. A gentle evening breeze caressed their faces. As they enjoyed the tranquility of their victory, a commotion erupted in the surrounding area. It was the sound of people chattering. Despite the distance, Mika's keen ears quickly identified the source of the disturbance. It's the bounded field. It's malfunctioning, Mika announced, rising to his feet. Perhaps Gilgamesh's final attack, Enuma Elish, disrupted the bounded field we set up. The people who originally lived in this area are panicking outside the ruins. They might come in at any moment. We need to retreat quickly. Let the church handle the cleanup. Upon hearing Mika's words, Ermid and Melly also stood up. The blush that had just begun to fade returned to their faces with renewed intensity. Mika, you should change your clothes. Hey. Mika was momentarily confused by Ermid's soft voice, then he remembered. His clothes had been completely incinerated by the flames. And during his final confrontation with Enuma Elish, the armor he wore had been nearly shattered by the chaotic storm, with fragments falling off at the slightest movement. After enduring numerous impacts, his armor was no longer capable of concealing anything. Under the moonlight, Mika's body was exposed for all to see. Oh, this is awkward. An air of embarrassment filled the air as Ermid and Melly blushed, while Merlin and Gabriel struggled to suppress their amusement. Gabriel. Yes, yes, yes. Gabriel floated over with a chuckle, retrieving a spare set of clothes from her dimensional pocket and handing them to Mika. What's with that expression? Mika grumbled, noticing Gabriel's teasing smile. Can't you act like a normal girl? Like Ermid and Melly. Please, I've seen it all before. Mika's mind flashed back to the realization that within Gabriel's petite form resided the soul of a goddess who had lived for over 100 million years. As the saying goes, even if you haven't eaten pork, you've seen a pig run, right? For a goddess as ancient and experienced as Gabriel, very few things outside of her familia could faze her. To most of the gods in Danmachi world, their small familia was their entire world. Realizing he was only making things more awkward, Mika quickly retreated behind a pile of rubble to change into the spare clothes. Let's head back quickly, Mika said, eager to escape the awkward atmosphere. Yes, the others agreed without hesitation. With that, Mika and his companions swiftly made their way back towards the Matu residence. As they approached the mansion, they were surprised to find it almost completely unscathed amidst the surrounding devastation. The Matu residence, our primary target, is practically undamaged, yet the surrounding area has been utterly destroyed. What kind of twisted logic is this? After expressing his bewilderment, Mika suddenly remembered Kariya and Sakura Matu. Weren't they the true residents of the Matu household? Ermid, where are Sakura and Kariya? Recalling that the two of them had been with Ermid and Meli before he ascended into the sky for the final battle, Mika directed his question to Ermid, who had shown great concern for Sakura. When assassin attacked, I instructed Kariya Matu to take Sakura and seek shelter elsewhere. I see. Mika decided they couldn't simply leave the two of them to fend for themselves. I'll go find them, he declared, seizing the opportunity to escape the awkward situation. Perhaps I should go instead? Your body has only just recovered, Mika, Ermid offered. As you said, I've already recovered. Please have faith in your own skills, Dr. Ermid. Mika winked playfully and headed off, giving Ermid a flattering compliment. Let's go, Gabriel. Take care, Mika. Don't worry. Waving to the others, Mika followed Gabriel's guidance towards the undamaged areas of the city. This way. Floating in mid-air, Gabriel, holding a spirit board, guided Mika from above. As a precaution against Kiritsugu Emiya's assassination techniques, Mika had asked Gabriel to create a special nin tool. It was called the tracking spirit board. By collecting a person's aura, it could mark their location on the board. Its monitoring range extended to a radius of 50 kilometers. If the target left this range, their aura would disappear from the board. Even if they re-entered the monitoring range later, the board wouldn't react unless their aura was collected again. Following Gabriel's guidance, Mika quickened his pace. At the same time, he couldn't help but marvel, it's amazing that you can create so many different tools so easily. Anyone else would have reached their limit long ago. The number of nin abilities an user could develop was limited. Therefore, most nin users focused on developing one or two abilities that best suited them, then refining and enhancing them further. Mika, for example, felt he was approaching some kind of limit after developing Calamity Wings, Angel Armament, Yahweh's Shield, and Right Hand of Fire. Of course. I'm a goddess, after all. Gabriel boasted, puffing out her chest with pride. Yes, yes, yes. Gabriel is the strongest, Mika replied absent-mindedly. You're just humoring me. Gabriel glared at Mika playfully before turning her attention back to the task at hand, leading them towards a narrow alley. They're inside here. She pointed at the tracking spirit board, her expression serious. Here. Mika frowned, looking at the alley. When the nin tool had been created, the auras of everyone in the Matu residence had been collected as a precaution. But now, the tracking spirit board was leading them to this alley. There was no place to hide two people in such a confined space. Could something have happened to them? Seeing Mika's expression growing grim, Gabriel quickly clarified, I know what you're thinking, but only Sakura is here. As for Kariya Matu, he's over there. Mika followed Gabriel's pointed finger and fell into deep thought. They've separated. It seems they really did encounter an enemy. Quickly entering the alley, Mika found Sakura hiding under a discarded piece of cardboard. Sakura, are you all right? He gently lifted Sakura into his arms and checked her condition. Mika and I. Seeing Mika, Sakura burst into tears. Uncle Kariya encountered an enemy. He went to fight and hasn't come back. I'm so worried about him. Hearing Sakura's sobs, Mika quickly comforted her. It's okay, the battle is over. Mika and I will take you to find Uncle Kariya. With that, Mika carried Sakura towards Kariya's location. However, as they approached, Mika noticed the situation from afar and gently placed Sakura on the ground. Sakura, stay here with Gabriel Nay. It's not a good scene for you to see. I'll go alone. Be a good girl and wait for me here. Gabriel immediately descended to the ground, standing beside Sakura and gently stroking her head. Mika and I, is Uncle Kariya okay? Sakura asked anxiously, worried about Kariya's safety. Don't worry, your Uncle Kariya is fine. Even from a distance, Mika could sense Kariya's breathing. Okay, then Sakura will wait here for Mika and I to come back. Sakura nodded resolutely. Good girl, Sakura. I'll be back soon. Mika smiled reassuringly at Sakura before turning and continuing towards Kariya's location. So, You failed after all, Kariya. Based on the surrounding scene, Mika quickly assessed the situation. However, even though Kariya had lost, Mika didn't blame him. After all, his opponent was Tokiomi Tosaka, an elite among mages. I was wondering why Tokiomi Tosaka didn't use a command spell to recall Gilgamesh before I could kill him. Was he worried about being unable to control Gilgamesh without any command spells remaining? Or did he simply not have enough time? I never expected him to be defeated before Gilgamesh. Mika chuckled softly, looking at the unconscious Tokiomi Tosaka lying nearby. Indeed, in Mika's eyes, Tokiomi was also a loser. As for Kariya, although he lost the battle, he had succeeded in another way. He had single-handedly shattered Tokiomi's last shred of hope. He had utterly destroyed the ideals Tokiomi had dedicated his life to. Even if Tokiomi survived this Holy Grail war, for a mage so obsessed with reaching the root, his existence might be more painful than death. After all, when he summoned Gilgamesh, he believed the root was within his grasp. There was nothing more painful than losing something just as you were about to obtain it. And to lose it to a man he had always looked down upon, a man who harbored feelings for his wife, no less. The pain must have been unbearable. Mika briefly empathized with Tokiomi's plight and felt a pang of sympathy. It was agonizing. Have you already treated your wounds? Then I won't bother you any further. After offering a brief farewell to the unconscious Tokiomi, Mika hoisted Kariya's limp body onto his shoulder and started walking back. Mika had no intention of killing Tokiomi. After all, there was no deep-seated hatred between them. It was Kariya who held the grudge. Furthermore, compared to other mages, while Tokiomi possessed the characteristic coldness of a magus, he still valued his family. His initial intention in sending Sakura to the Mata family had been noble. It was akin to an emperor with two exceptionally talented sons, both capable of leading the empire to greatness. However, there was only one throne. And the loser might face death. In the world of magecraft, a mage with extraordinary talent but lacking the protection of a powerful family was incredibly vulnerable. Tokiomi simply hadn't seen through Zukanmata's true nature. Carrying Kariya, Mika quickly returned to where Sakura and Gabriel were waiting. Uncle Kariya. Sakura rushed over, her eyes wide with concern as she saw Kariya's unconscious form. Don't worry, Sakura. Your Uncle Kariya has just fainted. Once we get back, Ermidne can heal him. Thank you, Mika and I. You're welcome. Let's go back to the Mata residence. Holding Sakura's hand, Mika started walking towards the mansion. As they walked, Sakura suddenly asked, "Is that father?" Mika was taken aback for a moment before replying with a wry smile, "Yes, that's him." "I see." Sakura's voice was devoid of emotion. Was the one who dropped bombs from the sky earlier also father's servant? "Yes," Mika answered honestly. "I see." Her voice remained flat, but Mika detected a hint of sadness. "Let's go home, Sakura," Mika said gently, tightening his grip on her hand. "Yes, let's go home, Mika and I." Sakura replied with equal sincerity. Chapter 82 A Shared Dream, Sparring in the Night. Oh no, does Sakura know? Ermid gasped upon hearing Mika's explanation. Although Sakura had been adopted into the Mata family, deep down, she still cherished memories of her parents and older sister. Yet, she had nearly been killed by her own father. Such a revelation would undoubtedly be a devastating blow to Sakura. "I'll go check on her," Ermid declared, rising to her feet and heading towards Sakura's room upstairs. Seeing this, Mika relaxed slightly. Sakura's indifferent expression upon returning had worried him greatly. Sometimes, apathy was more painful than sadness. In times like these, she needed the comfort of someone who had shown her kindness, like Ermid. After all, Ermid had been by Sakura's side ever since her rescue. With Sakura's well-being entrusted to Ermid, Mika turned to Merlin with a serious expression. "How is the barrier around the Mata residence progressing?" On their way back, Mika and the others had noticed something peculiar about the Mata mansion. While the surrounding buildings had suffered significant damage, the mansion remained unscathed amidst the ruins. It was undeniably suspicious. Therefore, upon returning, Mika had instructed Merlin to modify the Mata's bounded field and barriers, incorporating an illusionary effect. This would make the mansion appear indistinguishable from the surrounding devastation to any outsider. Initially, Merlin had resisted this task. However, after Mika raised his hand, revealing his command spells and offering to enhance Merlin's motivation, the Magus had reluctantly agreed. After all, he was the one who had insisted on joining them. As close friends, shouldn't they be willing to help each other? Rest assured, although my bounded field creation skill is low, it's simply because I find it difficult to maintain focus on such tedious tasks, Merlin declared proudly, having rarely exerted himself to this extent. So you're saying you just filled out your servant status sheet randomly? Mika quipped, leaning back on the sofa and looking at Merlin with a playful grin. More or less, Merlin admitted. After spending time together, their relationship had become quite comfortable. Therefore, Merlin saw no need to continue hiding such trivial details. By the way, where's Melly? Mika was, of course, aware of Merlin's true capabilities. Shaking his head in amusement, he inquired about Melly's whereabouts. Melly? She's gone to rest, Merlin replied, taking a sip of his tea. As soon as we returned, she complained about being exhausted and went to her room. It's the middle of the night, after all, and we just went through a fierce battle. If you hadn't assigned me this task, I would have retired for the night as well. As for Ermid, she's worried about Sakura's safety, so she stayed up and waited for you. Oh dear, I suppose the adrenaline from the battle kept me energized, and I completely forgot how late it is, Mika said, rubbing his forehead in frustration. He quickly regained his composure and turned to Merlin. You don't need sleep, do you? Since you're not doing anything else, let's discuss our next move. Ugh, you're really working me to the bone, aren't you? Merlin grumbled, though his ears perked up, and a spark of interest flickered in his eyes. After last night's battle, Gilgamesh and Hassan of the 100 Faces are confirmed to be out of the running. The remaining servants are you, Lancelot, Iskandar, Artoria, and Dire Muid. We have an alliance with Iskandar's faction. We likely won't fight each other until the other two are eliminated. So, what should our next move be? Do you believe a confrontation with Iskandar is inevitable? Merlin asked with a knowing smile. Isn't it obvious? Although Iskandar's wish is to regain his physical body and conquer the world once more, he doesn't want it handed to him. He wants to earn it through his own strength. Besides, the Holy Grail is currently unusable. We'll have to tell him eventually. If he can't fulfill his wish, the only remaining pleasure for him is to challenge powerful opponents. And currently, the strongest should be me, the one who defeated Gilgamesh. Mika glared at Merlin playfully. Don't tell me you didn't see that coming. I truly didn't, Merlin replied, though Mika didn't believe him for a second. He rolled his eyes and continued, what about you? Don't you have anything you want to say to Artoria? No, no. Merlin exclaimed, his voice laced with panic. It's been so long, and you still haven't figured out what to say to her. How can I come up with something like that on the spot? Merlin protested. Looking at Merlin's flustered state, Mika suddenly said, I recall you wanting Artoria to accept the fall of Britain, break free from the counter-forces contract, and journey to the reverse side of the world, right? Unlike other servants, Artoria Pendragon had not died. From the moment she drew the holy sword, her time had stopped. Therefore, she could not die. When her kingdom fell due to rebellion, she regretted her choices in her final moments. She believed it was all her fault. She longed to return to the time before she drew the sword, allowing someone else to wield it and guide Britain towards a better future. That was her wish. However, both Mika and Merlin knew that her wish was impossible to fulfill. King Arthur's story had already become history. And history could not be rewritten. Indeed, that is correct, Merlin said, shaking his head. After everything ended, Artoria suddenly agreed to the counter-forces contract and became a heroic spirit. In this state, she is eternally trapped in the war that led to her kingdom's downfall, forever burdened by her grief. Only when she accepts the past and releases her regrets can she find true liberation and embrace a brighter future. After listening to Merlin's explanation, Mika chuckled and said, in that case, why don't we bring Artoria and Iskandar together for a little chat? A chat? Merlin repeated, his eyes widening with intrigue. Precisely. Given Iskandar's overbearing personality, I'm sure he'll give Artoria a good scolding and call her a naive little girl or something along those lines. Ryder, wait. Saber, from this day forward, I shall no longer acknowledge you as a king. Hearing the words echoing from the crystal ball, Mika, who was lounging on the sofa, glanced at Merlin beside him. Although Merlin had been enthusiastic during yesterday's planning session, his expression now reflected a mix of emotions as he witnessed Artoria's distress. If you knew it would be this painful, why did you insist on doing it? Mika asked, sitting up and speaking in a neutral tone. No, while this process is undoubtedly painful, I believe it's something she must endure. Only after she confronts the truth can she truly find liberation, Merlin replied, his voice laced with conviction. How cruel, Mika sighed. Yesterday, after a discussion with Merlin, they had devised a plan to encourage Iskandar to engage Artoria in a discussion about their respective ideals of kingship. Given that Iskandar had already harbored such intentions, their plan aligned perfectly. And so, just moments ago, Iskandar and Artoria had engaged in a heated debate about their philosophies as rulers. Artoria, desperate to deny her past and rewrite history, was met with Iskandar's harsh reprimand. He ultimately stripped her of her title as king. While Merlin was pleased with the outcome, witnessing Artoria's sorrow filled him with a pang of guilt. However, for Artoria to break free from the shackles of her past, this was a necessary step. As far as Mika knew, for Artoria to truly overcome her self-destructive ideals, she needed to encounter Shiro Emiya, someone who shared her convictions. Through him, she would ultimately confront her true self. This was the essence of the saber root in the original story. However, in this world, Mika was unsure whether Shiro Emiya would even exist. After all, Shiro's birth was a direct consequence of the Holy Grail's descent upon Fuyuki City, an event that had resulted in widespread destruction. Amidst the devastation, Kiritsugu Emiya had found Shiro on the brink of death and used Avalon to save him, ultimately adopting the orphaned boy as his son. But now, aware of the Holy Grail's true nature, Mika had no intention of allowing it to descend upon the same location as in the original story. The population density in that area was far too high. As a result, Shiro Emiya's very existence might be jeopardized. This is quite troublesome, Mika mused. Should I help Merlin find a way to liberate Artoria? Lying back down on the sofa, Mika pondered the possibilities. However, he couldn't come up with a solution. After all, he wasn't Shiro Emiya. He couldn't offer Artoria the reflection of herself that she desperately needed. Besides, I'm not Artoria's master, Mika reminded himself, shaking his head and returning his focus to the grimoire in his hands. He had no intention of delving too deeply into the intricacies of magecraft in the Type Moon universe. However, he believed that mastering some basic spells, such as reinforcement magic, would be beneficial. As a system entirely different from Nen, OD and magical energy could coexist to a certain extent. If he could utilize both simultaneously in battle, his combat effectiveness would receive a significant boost. Thud. A heavy thud echoed through the silent room as Mika closed the grimoire. Another one finished. He placed the book aside and sat up, noticing Merlin's absence. Did Merlin go back to his room to reflect? Mika stood up, picked up the grimoire, and began to think. Ermit should be with Sakura right now. Gabriel is probably conducting research in the study. And Melly, she's probably in the library. With the grimoire in hand, Mika headed towards the underground library. It housed centuries worth of magical knowledge collected by Zukinmatu, including countless grimoires and books related to magecraft. Since arriving in this world, Melly had immersed herself in the library, eagerly absorbing the vast collection of magical knowledge. She had a genuine passion for magic. Controlling his footsteps to avoid making any noise, Mika silently entered the underground library. As expected, he found Melly there. She was dressed in casual clothes, just like Mika had been earlier, lying on a sofa and engrossed in a grimoire. The table beside her was piled high with various magical texts. On the few remaining clear spaces on the table lay her notebook and pen. It was evident that she wasn't simply reading passively like Mika. She was actively engaging with the material, formulating her own ideas and theories. So, how are you finding the magecraft of this world? Ah! Mika's sudden voice startled Melly, who had been deeply absorbed in her reading. When did you get here? She sat up abruptly and glared at Mika, realizing it was him. He had definitely done that on purpose to scare her. Just now. I came to return this book. Mika held up the grimoire and repeated his question. So, how are you finding the magecraft of this world? I love it. I absolutely love it. Melly hugged the grimoire in her arms and exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I adore anything related to magic. And the magecraft of this world is so vast and profound. Especially the existence of magus. It's so mysterious and captivating. She twirled around the room, her joy infectious. I'm glad you're enjoying it, Mika replied with a slight nod. He walked over to the shelf where he had retrieved the grimoire earlier and carefully placed it back in its designated spot. He then scanned the shelves, searching for another book that piqued his interest. After all, I promised you that I would find a world where you could learn magecraft. Now that you are satisfied, I can finally rest easy. Have you been keeping that promise in mind all this time, Mika? Melly asked, momentarily stunned, as she watched him browse the shelves. Of course. I made a promise to you, after all. A wide smile spread across Melly's face as she heard Mika's response. Suddenly, she rushed forward and hugged him from behind. What's wrong? Mika asked, surprised by her sudden embrace. Nothing. I'm just feeling incredibly happy, Melly replied, her voice muffled against his back. She released him, looked into his eyes, and impulsively kissed him on the cheek. Before he could react, she darted away, her laughter echoing through the library. Sleep well tonight. What was that all about? Mika pondered Melly's cryptic words, a puzzled expression on his face. Nightfall. As Mika drifted off to sleep, he saw Melly appear in his dream. What are we practicing tonight? He asked curiously. Some time ago, to further hone their skills, Mika had suggested to Melly that she join him in his dreams for sparring practice. After all, compared to Melly and Ermid, Mika had far more techniques he needed to master. Melly had readily agreed. From then on, whenever Mika or Ermid needed to practice their skills in their dreams, they would ask Melly for a sparring session. Melly never refused. However, due to her recent obsession with magecraft, they hadn't practiced together in their dreams for quite some time. Tonight, let's practice some techniques that would make Ermid jealous, Melly said with a mischievous grin. Chapter 83 Stolen Kiss. Ermid's suspicions. The next day. Despite Yahweh's rigorous training regimen, which had instilled in them a habit of waking early, Mika and Melly were surprisingly late. Ermid even went to their rooms to wake them up. Upon hearing Ermid's call, both Mika and Melly quickly finished their preparations and appeared at the dining table. What happened to you two? Ermid asked, her brow furrowed with concern as she noticed Mika and Melly's flushed faces. Nothing. Nothing at all. Mika and Melly responded in unison, their voices a bit too eager. Suspicious, Ermid muttered, her gaze fixed intently on the pair. Her scrutiny intensified their already evident nervousness, causing them to lower their heads in shame. Meanwhile, Gabriel, seated at the table, watched them with a knowing smile, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Her expression clearly conveyed that she had seen through their charade. Mika and Melly found it even more difficult to meet their companions' gazes. Just as the atmosphere grew increasingly awkward, Sakura, sitting beside Ermid, spoke up. Ermid, nay, can we eat now? I'm really hungry. Sakura's innocent voice instantly broke the tension. Looking at Sakura's pleading eyes, Ermid immediately forgot about Mika and Melly's unusual behavior. After all, what could they possibly be hiding? Of course, Sakura. Come, let's see what you'd like to eat. Anything is fine, as long as it's filling. I'm starving. Eat as much as you like. As Ermid's attention shifted to Sakura, Mika and Melly breathed a sigh of relief. They both felt guilty about what they had done. Neither of them could bring themselves to look Ermid in the eye. Thank goodness for Sakura. Relieved that the crisis had been averted, Mika expressed his gratitude to Sakura in his heart. He knew that Sakura had intentionally intervened to help them. Even if she didn't know what they had done. Sakura, I'll never forget your kindness. I promise to take good care of you, Mika vowed silently, glancing at Sakura as she ate her breakfast. Thus, after enduring a tense breakfast, Mika and Melly excused themselves, claiming they were full and wanted to continue their magic studies, successfully escaping the dining table. Whew! That was close. In the underground library, Mika collapsed onto the sofa, feeling as if he had narrowly escaped a disaster. Seeing this, Melly, who was about to express similar sentiments, kicked Mika's shin in annoyance. Aren't you usually so brave? Why are you acting so cowardly now? Ouch! Clutching his shin, Mika winced in pain. He quickly defended himself against Melly's accusation. This is different. It is different, Melly conceded, unable to argue with that statement. After all, Ermid wasn't an enemy but their closest companion. But since we did it, we can't let it be exposed. We need to prepare ourselves mentally, Melly emphasized. I know, Mika replied glumly. Good. Having given Mika her peace of mind, Melly was about to make some tea to calm her nerves when Mika suddenly grabbed her arm. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you since last night." Looking into Melly's questioning eyes, Mika asked seriously, "Do you often sneak into people's dreams and spy on them?" The previous night, faced with Melly's unexpectedly assertive behavior, Mika, who only possessed theoretical knowledge and lacked any practical experience, had been incredibly flustered. However, as Melly, who had initially presented herself as an experienced expert, continued to make mistakes, Mika realized that she, like him, was only a novice in this area. But while Mika's theoretical knowledge came from stories shared by his classmates in middle school in his past life, where did Melly acquire her knowledge? The answer was undoubtedly from her dream-walking escapades. Upon hearing Mika's question, Melly's face flushed crimson. "I just accidentally wandered into their dreams," she mumbled. After gaining the ability to manipulate dreams, Melly had developed a fondness for exploring the dreams of others at night. However, this often backfired spectacularly. After all, for many adventurers, their primary pursuits were fame, fortune, and beautiful women. In such an environment, it wasn't difficult to imagine the kind of dreams Melly frequently encountered. "I see," Mika nodded slowly, a look of realization dawning on his face. "So it was you who started that urban legend circulating in Orario. The strange phenomenon that nearly drove countless male adventurers to abstain from impure thoughts. It's said that many adventurers who dared to fantasize about their goddesses in their dreams suffered the most severe punishments. But no one knows what those punishments actually entailed." Sensing Mika's curiosity, Melly confessed sheepishly, "I simply turned their goddesses into frying jaw meal." "What? You mean frying jaw meal from the Ishtar familia?" Mika gasped. No wonder those adventurers looked like they were on the verge of death. Dreaming about that creature would leave anyone feeling utterly hopeless. Frying Jamil was a member of the Ishtar familia. Unlike other familias that focused on exploration or commerce, the Ishtar familia ran an entertainment district. It was a place centered around a specific type of transaction and was immensely popular among the male adventurers of Orario. Therefore, the members of the Ishtar familia were often referred to as prostitutes. Their combat-oriented members were known as fighting prostitutes. Frying Jamil was one of them. However, compared to her fellow familia members, her appearance was exceptionally grotesque. Anyone who saw her would describe her as a monster. Her appearance could best be described as a giant, humanoid toad. But even more terrifying than her appearance was Frying Jamil's mindset. She believed herself to be one of the most beautiful women in the world, rivaled only by the goddesses themselves. Therefore, in her mind, there was no man who could possibly refuse her. This mindset, combined with her formidable combat abilities, made Frying Jamil a nightmare for the men of the entertainment district. If you encountered her and caught her attention, escape was nearly impossible. She would drag you to her residence and torment you relentlessly until you lost all hope in the world. That's brutal. Mika thought to himself, looking at the seemingly innocent Melly with a newfound sense of awe and fear. "Melly, I'm warning you, if you try that trick on me in my dreams, I'll be furious." Mika spoke cautiously, wanting to prevent any future unpleasant surprises. After all, Melly's tactic was incredibly ruthless. If he encountered something like that in his dreams, Mika felt that any goddess would vanish in an instant. "Don't worry, I'm not reckless," Melly reassured him, waving her hand dismissively. She then continued with a serious tone, "I only do that to those with truly filthy minds, the kind that pollute your spirit just by looking at them. When I encounter those kinds of people in dreams, I simply can't control myself." Melly's voice hardened as she spoke, likely recalling those disturbing images. "I see. As long as you exercise restraint," Mika said, feeling slightly relieved. He lay back down on the sofa, attempting to regain his composure. Suddenly, Melly approached and sat on his lap, placing her hands on his shoulders. They gazed into each other's eyes. Then, Melly slowly lowered her head, bringing their foreheads together. Feeling each other's warm breaths, both Mika and Melly's hearts began to race. "We can't tell Ermit about us. You need to keep it a secret, understand?" "Understood," Mika whispered in response. Initially flustered by Melly's proximity and her alluring charm, Mika quickly regained his composure. He even felt a sudden urge to laugh. After their encounter in the dream the previous night, Mika and Melly knew each other's true nature. In Mika's eyes, Melly was nothing more than a talker. Although her experiences in dreams had made her a theoretical expert with the potential to become a seasoned veteran, theory was ultimately just theory. Melly was merely pretending. As expected. Seeing Mika's flustered expression and hearing his satisfactory response, Melly nodded with satisfaction and prepared to stand up. But Mika wasn't one to be easily dismissed. He wrapped his arms around Melly, pulling her back into his embrace, their bodies pressing closer together. Wait, Mika, what are you doing? Melly panicked, startled by Mika's sudden action. However, she was unable to break free from his strong, powerful arms. What am I doing? Isn't this what you started? Mika whispered into Melly's ear, their faces inches apart. Wait, I was wrong, Mika. Please, spare me. Sensing the danger, Melly quickly pleaded for mercy. But Mika remained unmoved. After last night, the relationship between Mika and Melly had undergone a significant shift. Mika knew that this unique connection between them would continue. However, because dreams were Melly's domain, it was inevitable that she would hold the dominant position in this relationship. Coupled with her mischievous nature, Mika anticipated that he would frequently find himself being toyed with by her. Therefore, Mika needed to reassert his dominance. Gazing into Melly's flustered face, Mika leaned in and kissed her. Their lips met, and a passionate atmosphere filled the library. Soon, amidst Melly's surprised gasps, Mika pushed her down onto the sofa, deepening their intimate exchange. He only stopped when Melly ceased her struggles and surrendered to the moment. Sitting up, Mika looked down at Melly, her face flushed, her eyes glistening with tears. He smirked and said, "Now you know your place, don't you?" Still trying to act tough. Melly let out a frustrated humph in response to Mika's teasing. After all, she was indeed a novice pretending to be experienced. She had initially thought it was just playful banter with Mika, but she hadn't anticipated his decisive actions. How could he be so bold? As Melly fumed inwardly, she suddenly remembered something and grabbed Mika's collar, pulling him back down. "I just remembered something," she said, her eyes narrowed as she stared at Mika's face. "Why were you so skilled last night?" "Hey!" Mika felt a sense of déjà vu upon hearing Melly's interrogation. He quickly dismissed the thought and focused on her question. This was a dangerous question. Why was he so skilled? Because he had done his research, of course. Although Melly frequently encountered such situations in her dreams, Mika doubted she would actively study various techniques. However, Mika, having lived in the information age of his past life, had already learned everything there was to know by the time he was in middle school. Therefore, in terms of practical knowledge, Mika was undoubtedly more experienced than Melly. But he couldn't reveal that. "What do you mean, skilled?" Faced with this question, playing dumb might not be the best solution, but it was the most suitable one at the moment. After all, as the saying goes, running away is shameful, but it's effective. Don't answer a question with a question. Melly's frustration grew as she saw Mika feigning ignorance. "Then why do you think I was so skilled?" Mika countered with another question. This time, however, Melly fell silent. They knew each other too well. During their time in Orario, the three of them had been inseparable. They trained together, discussed their familiar's plans, and explored the dungeon together. Their daily lives were so demanding that they barely had any time to rest. Given their lifestyle, Melly found it hard to believe that Mika would have had the opportunity to engage in such activities. "So? Why were you so skilled?" Although it was the same question, Melly's tone had softened considerably. As expected, in such situations, the key was to restrict the other person's movements and make them listen to your excuses. "Who knows? I just naturally knew," Mika replied vaguely. "Hey? What kind of answer is that?" Frustrated by Mika's evasiveness, Melly tried to stand up and confront him. But Mika quickly pushed her back down onto the sofa and kissed her again. Since he couldn't explain, he wouldn't. Mika decided to answer her question with actions. Hum hum hum. Mika emerged from the underground library, humming a cheerful tune, his spirits high. "What's with the good mood?" "Oh, it's Merlin." "Where are you going?" "To continue teaching Melly, of course. We agreed on a time." "I see. Then you should go." Suddenly remembering that Melly was currently in no state to be seen, Mika grabbed Merlin's clothes and pulled him aside. "Merlin, I need to talk to you." "Hey." Chapter 84 Mika vs Dire Muad Ua Duabitni. "So, what exactly is it that you wanted?" Leaning back on the living room sofa, Merlin asked with a sigh. Mika had pulled him aside on their way to the underground library. But even after arriving in the living room and spending over 10 minutes there, Mika had only been silently sipping tea, without uttering a word about his intentions. This left Merlin feeling puzzled. After all, Mika's intervention had disrupted his and Meli's agreement. As the magic teacher of another version of himself, Merlin was keen on maintaining a respectable image. "Don't worry, we already called out to Meli in the underground library before we left, and she responded." "So, this has nothing to do with you," Mika said with a placating smile. Meanwhile, he thought to himself, Meli should be done tidying up by now, right? Then it should be fine to let Merlin go down there. But what excuse should I use? Ah, I've got it. Suddenly recalling a previous idea, Mika declared to Merlin, "Actually, I plan to take Diarmuid's head tonight." The previous night, while Iskandar had gone to find Artoria for a drinking and philosophical discussion, Mika had learned from the damage to the Einsborn castle and Waver's account that the situation with Artoria was unfolding as it had in the original storyline. 2 nights prior, during Mika's decisive battle with Gilgamesh, Kainith had launched an attack on the Einsborn castle with Diarmuid, Kiritsugu Emiya, and Artoria. During that battle, Kiritsugu had severely injured Kainith, the clock tower's prodigy. This battle not only resulted in the failure of Kainith's operation but also cost him his identity as a magus. The mystic code Kiritsugu used to cripple Kainith was called the Origin Bullet. It was an anti-magus weapon crafted by Kiritsugu using the powdered remains of his own ribs. In the Type Moon universe, the concept of origin existed. Origin represented a person's essence and inherent nature. Kiritsugu's origin was severing and binding. Therefore, any weapon created using his body, such as the Origin Bullet made from his rib bone powder, would tear apart the blood vessels and other structures near the target's origin upon entering their body and then randomly reassemble them. If it were fired into a magus, their magic circuits would suffer the same fate as ordinary blood vessels, first torn apart and then haphazardly reconnected. As everyone knew, magic circuits were incredibly delicate and intricate virtual organs. Therefore, when a magus's magic circuits were severed and randomly reconnected, they would short-circuit. And they could not be repaired. According to the original plot, Kainith's command spells would soon be stolen by his fiancée. He would endure considerable hardship as a result. Ultimately, Diarmuid would not fulfill his promise to Artoria, unable to conclude their unfinished duel. He would die by his master's command spell. The cause of death, suicide. This filled Mika with a sense of melancholy. As the saying went, Lancer is a true man, always serving the wrong master. Whether it was Diarmuid in the 4th Holy Grail War or Cu Chulainn in the 5th, neither met a favorable end. In that case, allow me to send you on your way, Diarmuid. You and Artoria have no future together. Your obsession with your nightly duel will only lead to a tragic end. Mika understood that as long as Diarmuid remained, Artoria's arm would not heal, making them a constant target for Kiritsugu Emiya. In the original storyline, to combat the sea monster, Diarmuid had broken Gibidhi, the spear that had cursed Artoria's arm, to lift the curse. Afterward, with both master and servant significantly weakened, they became easy prey for Kiritsugu Emiya. After all, one should always pick the easiest target. Diarmuid. After a moment of contemplation, Merlin grasped Mika's intentions. He was, after all, a top-tier magus capable of deducing the future based on the information gathered through his clairvoyance. However, once Diarmuid is eliminated, the final battle will be upon us. Merlin looked at Mika and offered a serious reminder. With Diarmuid gone, only Merlin, Lancelot, Iskandar, and Artoria would remain. Under such circumstances, Iskandar, who sought victory above all else, would no longer uphold their alliance. The final confrontation would be inevitable. I know, Mika replied calmly, finishing his tea. Although it's been less than a week, I'll never forget the memories we've made. Therefore, it's time for the Holy Grail War to come to an end. So, how are your preparations coming along? Hearing Mika's inquiry, Merlin responded with a chuckle, of course, everything is complete. Good. Mika nodded firmly. Mika hadn't initially planned much for this Holy Grail War. After all, they didn't have much time. Even the limited time they had was spent learning about this world. Therefore, all plans regarding the Holy Grail were postponed until after the war's conclusion. Mika had only one objective in this Holy Grail War. To engage in as many battles as possible with the other servants and seize their noble phantasms. This was his path to self-improvement. Therefore, Mika had instructed Merlin to prepare various bounded fields and defensive positions on Mount Enzu to safeguard against the black mud that would emerge from the Holy Grail upon its arrival. Fuyaki City would become Mika and his companions' permanent residence in the future. Mika had no desire to see it destroyed again. After confirming the details with Merlin, Mika headed to the underground workshop, where he found Gabriel engrossed in her research. "How's the research progressing?" Mika asked with concern, observing Gabriel from behind. "Not well, I'm afraid. Progress has been slow," Gabriel replied with a sigh, turning to face him. Gabriel was referring to her research on the third magic, Heaven's Feel. This magic contained a near-infinite amount of knowledge. It was a mystery on par with, or even surpassing, the gods. Even for Gabriel, unraveling its secrets was a slow and arduous process. However, despite the slow pace, research on Heaven's Feel was steadily progressing. "Take your time. We have plenty of time," Mika reassured her. "By the way, Gabriel, how's the creation of the mystic code I requested coming along?" "You mean that cup?" Gabriel asked with a smile, understanding Mika's question. "It's finished." "Is this the place?" Mika asked Gabriel, his gaze fixed on the abandoned factory before them. "Yes, this is it." Gabriel's voice was filled with certainty as she consulted the tracking compass in her hand. On the compass, 2 blue dots were steadily closing in on the red dot that represented their target. The blue dots represented Kanath and Dire Muid. During the chaotic battle at the harbor, Gabriel had seized the opportunity to collect the scent of everyone present and marked them with tracking compasses. Therefore, aside from Tokyomi Tosaka and Kairei Koto Mine, the whereabouts of all the other masters were under Mika's constant surveillance. Tracking down any of them was a simple task. Mika nodded slightly. Just as he was about to enter the abandoned factory to search for Dire Muid, the Lancer suddenly appeared before him. "Castor and his master. Have you come seeking me?" Dire Muid held his 2 spears at the ready, his gaze fixed intently on Mika and Merlin, who stood behind him. He was already in battle-ready mode. Although he had never faced Mika or Merlin in combat, the massive explosion from 2 nights prior was still fresh in his memory. Later, through his master Kanath's familiars, Dire Muid learned that the explosion had been caused by a battle between Archer and Castor. In that battle, Gilgamesh, the king of heroes, who had left a lasting impression on Dire Muid, had perished. This significantly elevated Merlin's threat level in his eyes. Therefore, even though neither Mika nor Merlin showed any signs of hostility, Dire Muid remained vigilant. After all, his master, Kanath, was currently incapacitated. "Indeed, Lancer. You are our target," Mika replied calmly, meeting Dire Muid's wary gaze. "This Holy Grail war has been raging for 3 or 4 days now. The damage it has inflicted upon Fuyaki City surpasses decades of natural wear and tear. Therefore, I believe it's time to bring this Holy Grail war to an end. And I will personally send you back to the throne of heroes." Dire Muid's lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something, but he ultimately remained silent. Then, a determined glint appeared in his eyes. "Send me back to the throne of heroes? Defeating me won't be that easy," Dire Muid declared confidently. His confidence stemmed from his pride as the strongest knight of the Fianna. Even though he knew his opponent was a monster far beyond his level, it did not shake his confidence, his pride, or his fighting spirit. "Is this your knightly spirit?" Mika drew his great sword, his gaze sharpening. "Merlin." "Understood." As Dire Muid watched warily, Merlin's enhancements and blessings enveloped Mika. "Dire Muid Ue Duabaitni, the strongest knight of the Fianna, the shining one. Your opponent is me, Castor's master." Dire Muid's eyes held no trace of contempt. He had learned from his master that it was Mika and Berserker who had suppressed the King of Heroes within Iskandar's reality marble, ultimately provoking Gilgamesh into unleashing Ea, the Sword of Rupture. "Mika, is it? I won't hesitate simply because you are a master. For my master's victory, I must defeat you." Unlike other servants who sought the Holy Grail to fulfill their wishes, Dire Muid's wish had been granted the moment he was summoned. To serve his master faithfully until the very end. This was the regret he carried from his previous life. "For your master? Such loyalty, Dire Muid." Mika expressed admiration for Dire Muid's unwavering devotion. "Rest assured, Dire Muid. I am aware of your master's condition. He can no longer be considered a magus. I will protect him after your defeat. However, as compensation, I will claim your twin spears if you lose." Mika made a solemn promise. I am eternally grateful for your consideration. With that, Dire Muid lunged forward, his spear thrusting towards Mika. Mika raised Yahweh's shield in his left hand, effortlessly deflecting the attack. In truth, Mika was even more wary of Dire Muid than he was of Artoria. Dire Muid's noble phantasms, Dirg, Crimson Rose of Exorcism, and Gibadhi, Yellow Rose of Mortality, gave him a significant advantage in one-on-one combat. Dirg, in particular, was Mika's natural enemy. After all, Mika's ability to fight on par with servants relied heavily on Merlin's enhancements and blessings. If he were to be struck by Dirg, those enhancements and blessings would likely vanish instantly. Furthermore, a wound inflicted by Gibadhi would be impossible for Mika to heal, just like Artoria's injury. Of course, Ermid's healing magic, Dia Fratel, could heal such wounds. After all, Ermid's magic possessed both healing and purification properties. However, Mika had not brought Ermid to this battle. Therefore, he had already formulated a strategy against Dire Muid. Absolute defense. He could not afford to be injured. Undeterred by Mika's successful block, Dire Muid continued his assault. As a master of dual-wielding spears, his skill with the weapons was exceptional. With a swift twirl, he hurled his other spear towards Mika. At that moment, Dire Muid wielded the spear like a sword, his grip at the base of the shaft. This marked the beginning of Dire Muid's relentless spear attacks. His assault was a continuous barrage of thrusts and slashes. Each strike aimed for Mika's vital points. However, despite the ferocity of Dire Muid's attacks, he couldn't land a single blow. Whether it was Mika's shield deflections or his offensive counterattacks with his greatsword, Dire Muid's efforts were futile. Under Mika's eyes, Dire Muid's every move was within his grasp, rendering his attacks ineffective. In a way, Mika was Dire Muid's natural counter. Against a pure warrior like Dire Muid, who lacked wide-range attacks or special abilities, Mika's eyes allowed him to completely dominate the fight. What is this? As the attacker, Dire Muid also sensed the strange shift in the battle. He felt like prey caught in a spider web, unable to escape. Chapter 85 Mika's Gaze. Dire Muid's last stand. As a seasoned warrior with countless battles under his belt, Dire Muid possessed vast experience. In the brief exchange of blows, he had already grasped the perilous nature of his situation. He's seen through me completely. Bitterness filled Dire Muid's heart. Despite his opponent's youth, he had already surpassed him in the realm of martial arts. Dire Muid knew that this was a manifestation of a higher level of skill, a realm beyond his current reach. But he couldn't give up. For my master. With unwavering resolve, Dire Muid's twin spears danced with even greater ferocity. He sought to push past the limits of his own skill, to display a different fighting style, hoping to escape his opponent's grasp. But it was futile. Transparent World, the pinnacle of swordsmanship in the Demon Slayer world, possessed a unique characteristic. It didn't merely see through an opponent's techniques but rather the opponent themselves. Although a servant's body was comprised of spiritual energy, they still possessed the same physical structure as a human. Therefore, once Mika had perceived Dire Muid's body through Transparent World, all of his movements became predictable, devoid of any mystery. This was, in essence, a unique advantage stemming from Mika's status as a transmigrator. He possessed abilities that defied conventional understanding. In different worlds, similar techniques often developed along divergent paths. For instance, swordsmanship in the Demon Slayer world culminated in Transparent World, a skill-like ability. It was a realm attainable only through the Demon Slayer style of swordsmanship. In contrast, swordsmanship in the One Piece world revolved around wielding flying slashes, a domain exclusive to those who practiced that world's unique swordsmanship. Different sword styles in different worlds embodied distinct philosophies. This led to certain techniques appearing almost mythical to those unfamiliar with their underlying principles. This was the consequence of differing worlds and the contrasting philosophies embedded within their respective sword styles. Therefore, from Dire Muid's perspective, rooted in the Type Moon world, Mika's Transparent World was utterly incomprehensible. Clang! The sounds of clashing steel echoed through the abandoned factory as Mika meticulously analyzed Dire Muid's attacks, seamlessly deflecting each blow. Their figures darted across the ground, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Slashes of sword energy and spear thrusts tore through the concrete floor, further shattering the already dilapidated structure. Their battle raged from the open space into the factory's interior and back out again. As the fight progressed, Mika gradually deciphered every nuance of Dire Muid's spear techniques. Now, Mika stomped his foot, propelling himself forward with his shield raised, slamming it into Dire Muid. Mika had observed that Dire Muid's spear techniques relied heavily on footwork. His agile movements formed the foundation of his relentless assault. He aimed to seize control of the battlefield through a constant barrage of high-speed strikes. In that case, I'll disrupt your footwork first. Faced with the oncoming shield, Dire Muid swiftly retreated. For a spearman, maintaining an optimal distance was crucial for gaining an advantage. This was especially true for a dual-wielding spearman like Dire Muid. Furthermore, his two spears differed significantly in length. Therefore, maintaining the correct distance was paramount to his fighting style. However, a sudden wave of frigid air plunged him into a predicament. Cold air emanating from Mika's shield condensed into a thin layer of frost on Dire Muid's body. Simultaneously, a sheet of slippery ice rapidly spread beneath his feet. He's anticipated my every move. Realizing that his fighting style had been completely deciphered, Dire Muid leaped backward. He had to escape this unfavorable environment. But in the next moment, a searing blast of flames revealed the error of his choice. In a battle between evenly matched opponents, one should never jump recklessly. Mid-air, even the most skilled warrior was rendered helpless. Take this! Blazing sword slash! Mika's greatsword, engulfed in flames, cleaved through the air, unleashing a fiery wave of energy towards the airborne Dire Muid. Boom! A deafening explosion rocked the factory. Bright flames erupted from the point of impact, engulfing the surrounding area. This was Mika's Nin ability, Right Flame. Wielding the power of both fire and ice, Mika swiftly gained the upper hand in what was initially an evenly matched battle. The intense flames filled the factory with thick smoke, obscuring both combatants from view. Not far away, Dire Muid, wounded by the explosion, was momentarily relieved by the concealing smoke. However, the rapidly approaching footsteps shattered his hopes. Although the smoke hindered visibility, Dire Muid couldn't escape Mika's pursuit under the watchful eye of N. In an instant, they clashed once more within the dense fog. Clang! 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 The sounds of spear and sword colliding echoed through the smoke-filled factory. Dire Muid was no longer the one dictating the pace of the battle. Mika had seized control. Having deciphered Dire Muid's fighting style and gaining insight into his every move through transparent world, he had become the dominant force. If I had to choose the servant least likely to emerge victorious in this Holy Grail war, it would undoubtedly be Dire Muid, Mika mused as he relentlessly pressured Dire Muid with his ice shield and blazing greatsword. In this Holy Grail war, the most qualified victor was undoubtedly Gilgamesh, the king of heroes. If he were to fight seriously, he could likely end the war overnight. But that was an impossibility. Even during their final confrontation, Gilgamesh hadn't truly exerted himself. His attitude had shifted from underestimation to acknowledgement, but nothing more. Apart from Gilgamesh, the most likely victors were Merlin, Artoria, and Iskandar. Their strength and qualifications were undeniable. Among the remaining servants Dire Muid, and Hassan-I Sabah, Mika believed Hassan-I Sabah had the highest chance of winning. With Hassan-I Sabah's reconnaissance skills, once the identities of all the masters were confirmed, his master could utilize their exceptional command abilities to orchestrate a devastating master elimination strategy. This was Hassan-I Sabah's unique path to victory. However, such a strategy was highly unlikely to succeed for Dire Muid. Therefore, in Mika's eyes, Dire Muid had the lowest chance of winning this Holy Grail war. Why did Dire Muid have such a low chance of winning? Mika believed it was due to his excessive ordinariness. Dire Muid's overall configuration was simply too average, too mediocre. He lacked any decisive, game-changing abilities. Average physical prowess, average martial arts skills, and average noble phantasms. These ordinary abilities combined to create a servant who was, in essence, entirely ordinary. Of course, this ordinary was relative to the standards of top-tier servants. If a servant wasn't even considered top-tier, they had no hope of winning the Holy Grail war. However, if Dire Muid's chances were solely based on the shortcomings of his peers, Mika had nothing more to say. Clang! Mika swung his shield, forcing Dire Muid to stumble backward. As the battle progressed, Dire Muid's movements became increasingly sluggish as the frost continued to hinder his agility. This won't do. I can't let this continue. Sensing the growing stiffness in his body, Dire Muid frantically searched for a solution. Soon, he found a way. Is he using the burning buildings to counteract the effects of the frost? Mika smirked as he watched Dire Muid strategically retreat towards the areas engulfed in flames. In that case, let's make the flames burn even fiercer. In the blink of an eye, Mika's body was ablaze. He was rapidly converting his aura into flames. Fierce flames erupted from Mika's body, spreading outwards and igniting the surrounding structures. Soon, the entire factory complex was engulfed in a raging inferno. Feeling the intense heat radiating from all directions, Mika roared with laughter. If you enjoy the flames so much, then let's have even more. The scorching flames weren't limited to the buildings. The flames that enveloped Mika's body burned with ferocious intensity. Sensing the rapidly rising temperature, Dire Muid decided to retreat. The environment had become far too hostile for him. A wise choice. Mika wasn't surprised by Dire Muid's decision. After all, his opponent was the most formidable knight of the Fianna, a warrior with vast battle experience. Against such an opponent, one shouldn't rely on hoping for mistakes, they were unlikely to occur. Opportunities had to be created actively. Explosive flame sword. The moment Mika's blazing great sword collided with Dire Muid's weapons, a violent explosion erupted. Damn it! Dire Muid instantly leaped back as the explosion engulfed him. However, the attack was too sudden, leaving him no time to fully evade it. The powerful blast sent him hurtling through the air. Crash! He smashed through the factory's outer wall, landing hard in the open space outside. With exceptional skill, Dire Muid managed to regain his balance mid-air, ensuring a relatively stable landing. Despite this, the burns and frostbite covering his body were evident, significantly weakening his condition. A panicked cry echoed from another part of the factory complex, untouched by the flames. Moments later, a figure rushed out from the building. Go back, Sola Ui. It was Sola Ui Nuitari Sophia Ri, Kaneth's fiancée and Dire Muid's current master. After Kaneth lost his magical abilities, she had seized the command spells from him through torture, becoming Dire Muid's new master. Seeing the extent of Dire Muid's injuries, she immediately began casting healing magic. Feeling his wounds slowly mend, Dire Muid spoke with gratitude. Thank you for your assistance, Sola Ui. But please, leave this place immediately. This is not a battle you should be involved in. Although Mika had promised not to harm his master, that wasn't a justification for Sola Ui to interfere in their fight. Following Dire Muid's words, Mika leaped out of the burning factory. Dire Muid's expression hardened as he met Mika's gaze. But, recalling the severity of Dire Muid's injuries, Sola Ui's heart ached. Despite her deep affection for Dire Muid, she couldn't deny the obvious difference in their strength. Dire Muid was no match for the man before them. If this continued, Dire Muid would likely perish. The thought brought tears to Sola Ui's eyes. She had only just become Dire Muid's master. They hadn't even had a chance to create lasting memories, and now they were about to be separated forever? No. I won't accept this. Staring defiantly at Mika, Sola Ui raised her hand, her voice trembling with emotion. By the power of the command spell, I order you to achieve victory, Lancer. As the command spell activated, magical energy surged through Dire Muid's body. His power increased exponentially, his aura pressing against Mika's. Thank you once again for your support. I, Dire Muid Ue Duabitni, will claim the Holy Grail and offer it to you and my former master. Please, leave this place and seek safety. Yes, I understand, Dire Muid. With a lingering gaze filled with reluctance, Sola Ui turned and retreated towards the factory, leaving Dire Muid to face his fate. As they say, the hardest burden to bear is the kindness of a beautiful woman, Dire Muid, Mika chuckled, observing Sola Ui's departure and the resolute expression on Dire Muid's face. So, how do you intend to handle this affection? Dire Muid's eyes darkened. Mika's words brought back memories of another love he had experienced, a love that had prevented him from fulfilling his duty to his former master. My wish upon descending into this world is to offer unwavering loyalty to my master, to fight for him until my dying breath. I have no other desire. These words, spoken as much to himself as to Mika, seemed to reinvigorate Dire Muid's spirit. Feeling the surge of power granted by the command spell, he brandished his twin spears with renewed agility. Enhanced by a command spell, hey! Then I'll have to go all out as well. Dire Muid's eyes widened in alarm. He hadn't realized that Mika hadn't been fighting at full strength. Before his eyes, Mika plunged his great sword into the ground and shoved his hands into his pockets. Suddenly, a gauntlet appeared before Dire Muid, gripping the hilt of the great sword. Simultaneously, 5 more gauntlets, each wielding a different weapon, materialized around him. Then, these 6 weapons grew to an immense size in Dire Muid's vision. Each weapon now appeared taller than the entire factory building. "Are you ready? My attack is coming," Mika declared with a confident grin. Chapter 86 End of Battle. Iskandar request for a fight. A fierce wind pressure constantly buffeted Dire Muid's face. He was completely on the defensive. Though technically defending, his movements were primarily focused on evading Mika's relentless attacks. The 6 gauntlets controlled by Mika, each gripping a massive weapon, launched a barrage of strikes towards Dire Muid. Initially, Dire Muid had underestimated Mika's offensive. He believed that larger weapons inevitably meant slower movements. It was a fundamental principle. Therefore, facing these 6 colossal weapons, Dire Muid had been brimming with confidence. He believed his agility would be more than enough to evade the attacks. But he had miscalculated one crucial factor. It wasn't Mika himself wielding these massive divine weapons, but gauntlets animated by Nen. The gauntlet's strength was directly proportional to the amount of Nen Mika channeled into them. And at this moment, with Gabriel's assistance, Mika was drawing upon the immense magical energy of the Greater Grail. This boundless power flowed into him, continuously converting into Nen. Therefore, despite wielding these colossal weapons, Mika's attack speed showed no signs of slowing down. In fact, it surpassed his own physical limitations. Boom! The gauntlet wielding a massive sword cleaved horizontally, slicing through the building behind Dire Muid. Dust and debris filled the air. Compared to a noble phantasm, no concrete structure could withstand its might. This is quite troublesome. Dire Muid's face was slick with sweat as he narrowly dodged the incoming strike. Even during his previous direct confrontation with Mika, he hadn't felt this much pressure. It was as if he wasn't fighting a human swordsman, but a colossal warrior wielding weapons of immense destructive power. This is pure oppression. Dire Muid dared not clash directly against the enlarged noble phantasms. His own strength paled in comparison to the devastating power they wielded. Facing the relentless barrage of sword slashes and spear thrusts from above, Dire Muid was already using all his strength just to evade. He could only watch helplessly as Mika stood less than 20 meters away, unable to launch a counterattack. Bam! Boom! Crack! A cacophony of sounds filled the air as the entire abandoned factory complex became their battleground. Under Dire Muid's desperate evasions and Mika's relentless assault, the factory rapidly crumbled into ruins. Damn it! He's too agile. Distracted by the flying debris, Dire Muid swatted away the fragments while observing Mika intently, desperately searching for a weakness. He had initially planned to kite Mika, utilizing his superior mobility. But Mika's noble phantasms moved in perfect synchronization with him. In terms of agility, Mika was his equal. To have a chance at victory, I need to land a fatal blow. Otherwise, I won't get another opportunity. Dire Muid's eyes hardened with resolve as he glanced at the spear in his hand. He knew he had only one chance. If this attack missed, he would be completely defenseless. He continued to evade, weaving through the debris-filled battlefield. As time passed, Dire Muid's expression grew increasingly grim. Despite wielding 6 weapons simultaneously, Mika's movements were surprisingly coordinated and fluid, leaving no openings. His swordsmanship was flawless, leaving no room for counterattack. This realization was utterly despairing. Dire Muid knew the adage, never expect a skilled opponent to make a mistake. But he had no other choice. For seasoned warriors like them, as a battle progressed and their attacks clashed, even an initially flawless opponent would eventually reveal a weakness. If there was no opening, then create one. But this commonly used tactic was ineffective against Mika. He couldn't even land a single blow. With Mika's speed, if he were to be momentarily pinned down by even one weapon, he would be swiftly eliminated. Dire Muid couldn't afford to underestimate Mika's ability to exploit weaknesses. Despite the dire situation, Dire Muid still clung to the hope that Mika's youth might betray him. Mika was simply too young. Yet, this young man had managed to suppress him with his swordsmanship alone. Dire Muid found this terrifying. Moreover, it was clear that Mika's skills extended far beyond swordsmanship. He was undoubtedly a martial arts prodigy. However, even a prodigy couldn't master such diverse techniques and simultaneously achieve such a high level of proficiency in coordinated attacks. Considering Mika's age, Dire Muid held onto this sliver of hope. But it yielded no results. What can I do? He had vowed to serve his master faithfully and deliver the Holy Grail. Yet, faced with such a formidable opponent, he was completely powerless to retaliate. This realization filled Diarmuid with immense frustration. But just as despair threatened to consume him, the opening he had been desperately waiting for finally appeared. There. Observing the multiple weapons converging to block his movement, Diarmuid spotted a minute flaw in their coordination. The opening was incredibly subtle, but it was the key to turning the tide of this battle. Without hesitation, Diarmuid hurled his spear towards Mika, who stood with his hands casually tucked into his pockets. However, the brief moment it took to throw the spear left him vulnerable. He was struck by a massive weapon and sent flying backward. His body crashed through walls, tearing through the factory complex before finally slamming into the ground outside, rolling uncontrollably. At that moment, a thought struck him. Was that truly a weakness? Could that godlike young man truly make such a mistake? Or was it a trap, meticulously laid to ensnare him? His tumbling body came to a halt against a thick tree trunk. Blood flowed freely from his wounds as Diarmuid lay on the ground, pondering this question. Soon, Mika provided the answer. The colossal weapons effortlessly tore through the path leading to Diarmuid. He looked up and saw Mika standing before him, holding his discarded spear. When you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you, Mika said solemnly, his eyes fixed on the pool of blood forming beneath Diarmuid. I saw through your intentions long ago and crafted a narrative to suit your expectations. And now, the story reaches its conclusion. One of the two gauntlets, which had returned to their normal size, flew to Diarmuid's side and retrieved his short spear. The other gauntlet accepted the long spear from Mika's hand. The next moment, the process of converting these two noble phantasms into non-constructs began. If Mika waited until after Diarmuid's death, the passage of time might cause him to lose access to these valuable weapons. Although Mika had previously deemed Diarmuid's noble phantasms mediocre, they were undeniably effective when used strategically. I have received my reward. You may return to the throne of heroes with peace of mind, Diarmuid Urokodaki, the strongest knight of the Fianna, the shining face. Ah, have I been defeated? Leaning against the sturdy tree trunk, Diarmuid, surprisingly, didn't display any resentment. Although I couldn't secure the Holy Grail for my master, I fought for him until the very end. My wish has been fulfilled. A faint smile graced Diarmuid's lips. This time, he hadn't repeated his past mistakes. Though I couldn't fulfill my promise to Saber, to die at the hands of such a formidable warrior as yourself, I have no regrets. Diarmuid's body was riddled with broken bones from the devastating blow he had received. Coupled with the damage to his internal organs and the significant blood loss, he was now completely incapacitated, despite his spiritual core remaining intact. Unless his master was nearby to heal him with magecraft or utilize a command spell, he had no chance of recovery. However, due to the sheer destructive power of Mika's earlier attacks, Sola Ui had no choice but to carry the severely injured Kenneth away from the battlefield, seeking refuge in a safe location to await the battle's conclusion. Unlike Merlin, Sola Ui didn't possess the ability to protect herself amidst such a fierce confrontation. Therefore, Diarmuid had reached a dead end. In that case, allow me to grant you a final farewell. Drawing the long sword embedded in the ground, Mika slowly approached Diarmuid and raised the blade high above his head. No! A piercing scream echoed from the distance. It was Sola Ui, who had desperately rushed back. Seeing Diarmuid leaning against the tree and Mika poised to deliver the final blow, she cried out in anguish. Suddenly remembering the command spells, she frantically raised her arm to activate them. But Mika was faster. The moment she appeared, his sword had already begun its descent. After all, he had already delivered his parting words. Allowing Diarmuid to rise and continue the fight would be incredibly awkward. As Mika's sword pierced Diarmuid's spiritual core, a blinding light erupted. "No!" Ignoring the anguished cries from afar, Mika spoke softly. "Farewell, Diarmuid." "Ah, farewell." Watching Diarmuid fade away, transforming into spiritual particles, Mika bid him a final goodbye and turned to leave. As he walked back, Sola Ui, running at full speed, bypassed him and rushed towards Diarmuid's fading form. She resisted the allure of Diarmuid's guise, choosing to love him of her own free will. Yet, Diarmuid's priority was loyalty to his master. Truly a tragic fate. Shaking his head with a sigh, Mika disappeared into the night. Speaking of which, Kenneth shouldn't be dead yet, right? Should I inform Waver? Yes, I should. He ultimately chose to come. Standing atop the factory roof, Mika observed Waver conversing with Kenneth in the forest. A smile touched his lips. He has finally matured. The Waver of the past had been a complex individual, burdened by both pride and insecurity. This was a consequence of his upbringing and experiences. It made him overly sensitive. Yet, he also possessed a reckless determination. He had participated in this Holy Grail War and encountered his greatest teacher. Thank you for guiding him, King of Conquerors. Turning around, Mika addressed Iskandar, who stood beside him. Your teachings have helped Waver mature significantly. Ha ha ha. It is my duty as a servant to guide my master's growth. Iskandar declared with a boisterous laugh. But his expression quickly turned serious. If you truly wish to express your gratitude, then how about granting me a request? Are you asking for a battle? Mika replied with a knowing smile. Ha ha ha. As expected of you, you've seen right through me. Iskandar chuckled heartily. Through your conversations with Waver, I've learned about the state of the Holy Grail. It can no longer grant wishes, correct? In that case, my only remaining desire is to clash with a worthy opponent. Initially, my target was that golden mongrel, but I never imagined he would fall to you so early. Therefore, I challenge you. However, due to your relationship with Waver, I'm hesitant about this battle. Although I relish combat, I don't wish to cause him any distress. Iskandar glanced towards Waver in the distance, a gentle smile on his face. Don't worry, I won't put him in a difficult position, Mika assured him. I accept your challenge. Let's settle this tomorrow night. Excellent. It's a promise then. Iskandar's eyes lit up, and he extended his fist. Indeed, it's a promise. Mika returned the gesture with a smile, their fists colliding in mid-air. Their eyes locked, filled with anticipation and the thrill of the upcoming battle. Late that night. In the living room of the Mata residence, Mika, Ermid, Melly, Gabriel and Merlin sat on the sofa, surrounding a table, their gazes meeting in a silent exchange. Everyone, I've decided to conclude the Holy Grail War tomorrow, Mika announced, his voice firm and resolute. It's about time. Melly exclaimed, casually stroking the grimoire in her hand. The Holy Grail War holds little significance for us. Rather than allowing these dangerous individuals to gather in Fuyaki City, it's better to end it swiftly and return to our peaceful lives. Ermid nodded in agreement with Melly's sentiment. Due to the ongoing Holy Grail War, they couldn't freely venture outside during the day unless accompanied by Mika or a servant. Neither Ermid nor Melly enjoyed burdening others, so they had chosen to remain indoors, minimizing any inconvenience for Mika and the others. However, wouldn't ending the Holy Grail War so abruptly have negative consequences? Ermid inquired, voicing her concerns. Gabriel offered a reassuring smile. Don't worry, everything is in place. That's good to hear. Ermid trusted Gabriel implicitly. Since I have a duel with Iskandar scheduled for tomorrow night, I'll entrust the situation at Mount Enzu to you, Merlin, Mika said, turning to Merlin beside him. Don't you need my assistance? Merlin asked. No, I've made adequate preparations, Mika replied with a confident smile. If you're certain, then I won't accompany you tomorrow. But before that, there's one more task we need to complete, right? Mika and Merlin exchanged knowing glances and grinned simultaneously. We need to retrieve the Lesser Grail from the Einsburns. Chapter 87 New Battlesuit. Mika vs King of Conquerors Iskandar. Fuyaki City. In the future Emiya residence, after a day of hard work, Artoria was enjoying a hearty dinner. Watching Artoria's impressive appetite, Iris Veal von Einsburn, seated beside her, managed a weak smile. As a homunculus created by the Einsburn family to house the Lesser Grail, Iris Veal's condition deteriorated with the progression of the Holy Grail War and the deaths of servants. She would eventually meet her demise as the Lesser Grail, which contained the souls of defeated servants, continued to grow within her. Saber, thank you so much for your help today. Due to her weakening body, Iris Veal could only watch Artoria's movements without offering assistance. In truth, Iris Veal's mobility was severely limited. The souls of 3 servants now resided within her. It's nothing, Iris Veal, Artoria said earnestly, setting down her bowl. As your knight, it's my duty to help. Thank you. Iris Veal smiled at Artoria's sincerity. However, her expression quickly turned somber. I wonder how Kiritsugu is doing. Reflecting on the events of the past few days, both Irisveal and Artoria felt a sense of bewilderment. Everything had happened so quickly, so unexpectedly. It was as if they were mere supporting characters in a story, existing solely to highlight the protagonist's actions. Despite their active participation in the war, they had achieved nothing. Without their knowledge, Gilgamesh, Hassan-I Sabah, and Dire Muad Uaduabitni had all been eliminated. Of the remaining 3 factions, 2 resided within the heavily fortified Matu residence, while Iskandar spent his days soaring through the skies, making it impossible for Kiritsugu Emiya to pinpoint his location. This left Kiritsugu feeling powerless and frustrated, unable to find an opening to strike. Both Irisveal and Artoria had sensed his growing anxiety during their recent conversations. Kiritsugu believes the mastermind behind all this is hiding within the Matu residence, but they seem to be extremely wary of him. Any electronic surveillance devices near their home are rendered useless. As for magical surveillance, it's even more futile against the wise Merlin. Furthermore, Kiritsugu suspects they have a unique method of monitoring their surroundings, as he's always targeted whenever he approaches the Matu residence. Irisveal sighed, rubbing her forehead in frustration. This situation has been troubling Kiritsugu deeply. Merlin. Artoria muttered, her thoughts drawn to the name Irisveal had mentioned. She harbored complex emotions towards Merlin. Despite their shared past, they were now adversaries in this Holy Grail war. If only Merlin were on our side. Artoria sighed wistfully. Oh my, do you miss me that much, Artoria? A familiar voice startled Artoria, causing her to leap to her feet and draw her sword. Simultaneously, her men's suit vanished, replaced by her battle attire. Despite the fond memories she held of Merlin, she knew he was now her enemy. Merlin, what are you doing here? Artoria demanded, her gaze fixed warily on the Magus who had materialized within their home. Based on her understanding of Merlin, he wouldn't appear without a specific purpose. What was his motive? Had he come to fight her? Artoria was filled with uncertainty. Sensing her apprehension, Merlin chuckled softly. Don't worry, tonight is not the time for our battle. He then turned his attention to Irisveal, who was shielded protectively behind Artoria, and said with a playful grin, besides, this lovely lady isn't your master, is she? You know. Artoria asked, surprised. Of course. Don't underestimate me, Artoria. Artoria bit her lip, a wave of frustration washing over her. Then what is your purpose here? I'm here to deliver an invitation, Merlin replied, holding up an envelope. My master has decided to conclude the Holy Grail War tonight and welcome the arrival of the Greater Grail. Therefore, he extends this invitation to you. Invite us. Artoria's face hardened with anger. You intend to use us as sacrifices to summon the Greater Grail, don't you? We will not attend. Artoria declared resolutely. Suit yourselves, Merlin said nonchalantly, having devoured the food on Artoria's table while they spoke. He turned and walked towards the exit. I'm merely a messenger, after all. With that, Merlin vanished from sight. Artoria stood in silence for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the spot where Merlin had disappeared. Finally, she turned to Irisveal and asked, what do you think of Merlin's invitation, Irisveal? However, Artoria's question was met with silence. Irisveal was no longer in the room. This is an illusion. Merlin. Artoria instantly grasped the situation. Merlin had used an illusion to deceive her and had kidnapped Irisveal. Rage surged through Artoria's veins. She stormed out of the Emiya residence, heading towards the Matu mansion at full speed. Nightfall. Fuyaki Bridge. Mika leaned against the bridge's railing, admiring the tranquil beauty of the Mayan River. The bridge was deserted, and the surrounding area was enveloped in a bounded field that repelled any unwanted visitors. As Mika enjoyed the night scenery, a thunderous roar shattered the silence. Moments later, Iskandar, driving his Gordius wheel, appeared in Mika's view before landing gracefully on the bridge. It's good to see you again, King of Conquerors, and Waver. We've arrived, Mika. It was Waver who responded, his voice filled with newfound confidence compared to their previous encounter. Ha ha ha, Mika, we've come to accept your invitation. Iskandar boomed, his face beaming with excitement as he observed Mika's attire, which differed from their previous meeting. It seems you've prepared quite thoroughly today. Of course. Mika grinned, understanding that Iskandar was referring to his armor. This was the first-class armor he had commissioned from the Hephaestus Familia. It had cost over 100 million valis. This single purchase had depleted a significant portion of the Yahweh familia's savings. If it weren't for Gabriel's presence, which had enabled them to accumulate wealth far more efficiently than other familia, they wouldn't have been able to afford such an extravagant piece of equipment. Mika had named this first-class armor Azure Battlesuit. Mika had frequently utilized the Azure Battlesuit since its creation. Initially designed to compensate for the Angel armament's lack of physical defense, it also served as the foundation for one of Mika's ultimate techniques. It was incredibly durable. In addition to being crafted from various precious materials, it was imbued with the unbreakable enchantment. Moreover, it possessed a unique overall structure, which was crucial for Mika's special technique. Victory in this battle is mine. So, Waver, bid farewell to the King of Conquerors, Mika declared, his arms crossed confidently. Waver's heart ached as he heard Mika's words and looked at Iskandar beside him. He had long understood that their connection, forged through the master-servant bond, would eventually come to an end. He hadn't dwelled on it then, but now, the realization brought a pang of sadness. However, even as they faced their final battle, Waver refused to succumb to despair. Looking at Iskandar, he asked earnestly, "Rider, are you confident in your ability to defeat Mika?" "I never lack confidence in victory. However, we cannot underestimate the danger he poses." Iskandar replied solemnly, "You witnessed that massive explosion the other night. It was a clash between two forces of equal magnitude. In other words, Mika possesses a technique comparable to that golden archer's sword. That makes him extremely dangerous." "Dangerous, indeed." Waver contemplated Mika's strength. In his opinion, Gilgamesh's ability to completely shatter Iskandar's reality marble stemmed not only from the sheer power of his sword but also from a type advantage. Gilgamesh's noble phantasm likely possessed an anti-world attribute. That was why Iskandar's noble phantasm had been defeated so swiftly. However, as long as Mika's ultimate technique didn't possess a specific advantage against reality marbles, even if it was powerful, it shouldn't pose a threat to Ionio Ihitiroi. But currently, Iskandar's noble phantasm, Ionio Ihitiroi, hadn't fully recovered. A final wish, then. Recalling Iskandar's response when he learned of their impending battle against Mika, Waver's resolve solidified. "By the power of this command spell, return to your peak condition, Rider. By the power of this command spell, surpass your previous limits, Rider. By the power of this command spell." Waver looked up at Iskandar, who had been watching him intently since he began using his command spells. Memories of their time together flooded his mind, and tears welled up in his eyes. With unwavering determination, he shouted, "Iskandar, King of Conquerors, you must conquer the world. Failure is not an option." Fueled by Waver's command spells, Iskandar's power surged. As the last command spell on his hand vanished, Waver knew that his connection with Iskandar had come to an end. "It's all up to you now, Rider," Waver said, his voice choked with emotion. "What are you talking about?" Iskandar reached down, grabbed Waver by the collar, and lifted him onto the chariot. "Wait, why are you taking me? I'm no longer your master." Waver struggled in vain. "You may no longer be my master, but you are my friend." Iskandar placed Waver beside him and smiled warmly. "As my friend, you will fight alongside me." "Friend." Tears streamed down Waver's face as he heard Iskandar's heartfelt words. "Can I truly stand by your side and fight alongside you?" "Don't be silly. You've been fighting alongside me all this time." Iskandar ruffled Waver's hair with a chuckle. "Yes." Waver nodded vigorously, his heart overflowing with gratitude. Iskandar smiled and turned his gaze towards Mika. "We're ready, Mika." "Excellent." Mika smiled at the sight of Waver and Iskandar standing united. "Then let's begin. But if you lose, you have to leave your chariot with me, King of Conquerors." "Ha ha ha! You dare to covet the treasures of the King of Conquerors!" Iskandar roared with laughter, brandishing his sword. "Then come and try to seize them. Come, my comrades. Tonight, let us etch our valiant figures into the grandest of legends. Ionio Ihitiroi." As Iskandar's voice thundered across the battlefield, an immense surge of magical energy erupted, enveloping all four of them within Ionio Ihitiroi, the reality marble of the king. From atop a tall building overlooking the Mata residence, Kiritsugu Emiya observed the mansion through his binoculars. In Kiritsugu's mind, the only remaining threat capable of contending for the Holy Grail was the pair of twisted master and servant residing within the Matter residence. Last night, he had received a call from Iris Veal, informing him that Saber's injuries had fully healed. It's eerily quiet, almost too quiet. Something feels amiss, Kiritsugu muttered, his gaze fixed on the darkened Matter mansion. What do you think, Miri? Indeed. While the Matter residence is usually quiet, there's usually at least some light at this hour. But tonight, there's nothing. His partner, Mihisa, replied with a serious expression. Could it be that no one is at the Matter residence tonight? Kiritsugu suddenly realized the possibility. Did they all leave? But for what purpose? To hunt down the other masters. Is it Rider? Or perhaps Saber? Kiritsugu quickly rose to his feet and pulled out his phone, attempting to contact Iris Veal. However, all he heard was the monotonous beep, beep, beep of the unanswered call. Let's withdraw, Miri, Kiritsugu said urgently, retrieving his equipment box. Understood. Mie, also grasping the situation, began to gather her weapons. Suddenly, she spotted a familiar figure speeding through the distance. Kiritsugu, I think that's Saber. Where? Near the Matter residence. Kiritsugu quickly retrieved his binoculars and focused on the Matter mansion. And then, he saw it. Artoria Pendragon, the King of Knights, crashing through the gates of the Matter residence on a motorcycle. Chapter 88 50 meters Giant. Calamity's Descent. Back here again. As far as the eye could see, there was only yellow sand. Looking at the soldiers faintly visible in the distance, a faint smile played on Mika's lips. Are you sure about this, Mika? Floating around Mika, Gabriel asked worriedly. Although she knew Mika still had a so-called trump card hidden, she knew nothing about the specifics of this technique. Therefore, she found it hard to understand Mika's confidence. If it really doesn't work, Mika, just use Gilgamesh's EA, Gabriel suggested, looking at the confident Mika. With that sword, Iskandar's reality marble will be instantly destroyed. No, I don't intend to use the King of Heroes EA until we reach the most critical moment, Mika said calmly, putting on the mask attached to the inside of his helmet. His entire body was encased in armor, leaving only his eyes visible. If I use EA, then it wouldn't be me who defeated Iskandar, but the deceased King of Heroes, Gilgamesh. Against this great king, I want to win with my own strength. Hearing the determination in Mika's voice, Gabriel stopped persuading him. I understand. In that case, I'll provide you with all the magical energy I can, she said. I'll leave it to you. Looking at the army that had completely assembled in the distance, Mika said seriously, I'm going to use a lot of magical energy today. As Mika spoke, two gauntlets, each gripping a noble phantasm, floated beside him, awaiting the start of the battle. He's not using that. Looking at the fully prepared Mika, Iskandar, who had been silent for a moment, couldn't help but laugh. What's that? Waver asked curiously. That? It's that strange sword of golden sparkles, Iskandar replied. Hey? That one? Waver exclaimed, recalling the moment Mika had snatched the sword in front of them all. But didn't you say that the sword might have been taken back? When the explosion erupted in the center of Fuyaki city, Iskandar had speculated that Gilgamesh might have retrieved his sword, otherwise, the two wouldn't have caused such a massive explosion. Iskandar couldn't believe that Gilgamesh could possess two noble phantasms like EA. But it's highly likely he has it again, Iskandar said, his gaze serious. Mika once said their goal wasn't the Holy Grail, but something else. Judging from the fact that he can claim a servant's noble phantasm as his own, his goal should be to collect servants' weapons, just like how he asked me for the Gordius wheel earlier. Therefore, it's highly likely that he obtained that strange sword from Gilgamesh after defeating him. After listening to Iskandar's reasoning, Waver's eyes widened in horror. They had all witnessed the immense power of Gilgamesh's EA. It was an anti-world noble phantasm capable of instantly destroying Iskandar's reality marble. But Waver quickly recovered from his shock. Although Mika isn't using that sword now, it doesn't mean he doesn't have it. Maybe he just doesn't plan to use it, Waver said cautiously. So we must be on guard. Don't worry, I know. Laughing heartily, Iskandar patted Waver on the back and then shouted to his soldiers, my men. We are facing a hero comparable to those from myths and legends. He defeated that overwhelmingly powerful king of heroes with his human body. Facing such a brave warrior, your blood must be boiling with excitement, right? Indeed. 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 Tens of thousands of soldiers roared in unison, responding to Iskandar's call. For a moment, their shouts filled the entire desert. Then charge! Let us vanquish the formidable foe before us. Charge! Amidst Iskandar's thunderous roar, tens of thousands of soldiers charged towards Mika. Leading the charge at the forefront were Iskandar and Waver in their chariot. Has it begun? Then I shall begin as well. Mika smiled faintly, and the gauntlets beside him sprang into action. This time, they didn't enlarge directly. Instead, they flew towards Mika and encased his outstretched hands. The next moment, violent auras wrapped around Mika's armor. Let's begin. Jing bang! With Mika's soft murmur, the armor he wore began to rapidly expand. In the blink of an eye, the armor, initially less than 2 meters tall, grew to over 50 meters, increasing in size by almost 30 times. His spear and shield also underwent the same magnification. Inside the armor, Mika sat cross-legged on a platform formed by the interlocked gauntlets, focusing all his mental energy on controlling the colossal iron giant. This was the ultimate technique of Mika's Nin ability, Calamity's Wings. The iron giant stood tall on the earth. This was the ultimate technique Mika had designed for his future self, as the amount of aura it required was incredibly vast. As long as there was sufficient aura, the giant's size could increase infinitely. Although it was generated from armor, the influx of aura made its internal structure incredibly solid. The giant standing on the earth was no mere empty shell. What is that? Whether it was Iskandar, Waver, or the charging warriors on the ground, they all felt a wave of despair wash over them as they gazed at the 50-meter-tall iron giant in the distance. They understood. This iron colossus was beyond human comprehension. As they watched in horror, the iron giant moved. It swung its massive shield with tremendous force. The next moment, a violent windstorm swept across the battlefield, sending countless soldiers flying through the air. The sky and the ground were filled with tumbling bodies. Don't panic! Iskandar's voice boomed across the battlefield. Didn't I tell you before the battle? Our opponent is a hero comparable to those from myths and legends. It's only natural for him to employ such extraordinary means. Don't forget the last time. Compared to that Golden King's sword, this is nothing. Iskandar's roar instantly dispelled the fear that had gripped his army. This was the army that Iskandar, the king of conquerors, took great pride in. As long as Iskandar hadn't given up hope, they wouldn't either. So resilient, are they? Mika, who could see everything through smiled faintly. The next moment, he controlled the iron giant to leap into the air. He soared high above the battlefield. And beneath him was Iskandar's army. Saber, why are you alone? Where's Irisveal? Upon seeing Artoria's solitary figure from the high-rise building, Kiritsugu Emiya knew something was amiss. He swiftly departed, entrusting the cleanup operation to Mihisa, and made his way to the vicinity of the Matu residence, awaiting Artoria's return. Soon, Artoria appeared before him, her expression grim, indicating her search had been fruitless. Thus, the master and servant were reunited. Irisveal, she was taken by Merlin. Artoria said through gritted teeth. Merlin's actions were deeply unsettling to Artoria. He knew Irisveal wasn't her true master, yet he had still abducted her. What was his motive? Artoria had no clue. Merlin. Kiritsugu was stunned. What exactly happened? He demanded a detailed explanation. Artoria recounted the events that had transpired. Let's go to Mount Enzu. Kiritsugu declared. He knew that with Castor's power and cunning, if they claimed they would end the Holy Grail War tonight, they must have a meticulously crafted plan. As one of the 4 major ley line convergence points in Fuyuki City and the location of the Greater Grail, Mount Enzu was indeed a suitable location for the Grail's descent. And Irisveal's role was to facilitate the Grail's manifestation. This was something Artoria was unaware of. With Castor's strength and strategic mind, Mount Enzu is likely heavily fortified by now. Saber, we'll move together this time. Kiritsugu knew that a unique bounded field surrounded Mount Enzu. This bounded field restricted all spiritual bodies to using the main road to reach the summit, preventing any other means of infiltration. Therefore, Saber had no choice but to take the main road. However, Mount Enzu was likely transformed into Merlin's magical territory by now. In such a situation, even Kiritsugu wouldn't dare to venture in alone. It would be suicide. Therefore, he had to accompany Artoria and enter Mount Enzu via the main road. Understood. Artoria nodded. However, she couldn't help but voice her confusion. Kiritsugu, do you know why Merlin took Iris Veil? Given his personality, he wouldn't act without a purpose. But I can't fathom what use Iris Veil could possibly be to him. Kiritsugu was momentarily taken aback by Artoria's question. He quickly regained his composure. Let's go. I'll explain everything on the way. Kiritsugu led the way, heading towards Mount Ensu. Within the Ryuadu temple atop Mount Ensu, the only occupants were Merlin and his companions. The monks who resided there had been subtly influenced by Merlin's suggestion magic to leave the temple and seek refuge in Fuyuki City. And now, within Merlin's meticulously constructed magical territory, atop the central altar, a slightly translucent chalice floated in mid-air, emanating an alluring aura. This was the lesser grail provided by the Einsborn family. Using specialized techniques, Merlin had extracted it from Iris Veil's body. Merlin, Ms. Iris Veil has mostly recovered. She should be out of danger now. Ah, Melly. Turning around, Merlin greeted her with a cheerful smile. Are you here to inform me of her condition? Yes. I noticed you seemed quite concerned about her. After extracting the lesser grail, you not only healed her body and extended her lifespan but also returned Avalon to her. So, I came to inform you once she was stable. I see. Thank you for letting me know, Melly. Merlin chuckled and continued. I did all that simply to spare Artoria further heartache. Their bond is so strong. If she's destined to face the crushing blow of an unfulfilled wish, then any emotional distress that can be avoided should be avoided. In this Holy Grail war, that's all I can do for her. Melly paused for a moment before smiling warmly. While you might have some shortcomings as a person, as a mentor, Merlin, you are truly trustworthy. Well, there's nothing I can do about it. Although we are essentially the same person, I am a half-incubus, half-human hybrid, born with a naturally detached nature. Unlike you, a half-elf raised in human society. When it comes to understanding human emotions, I naturally fall short. Sometimes, I truly envy you, Melly. Merlin said with a sigh, shaking his head. Perhaps wishing to change the subject, he suddenly asked, by the way, is Ermid still with Iris Veil? Yes, she said she wanted to study that scabbard. Avalon. Since my master said he couldn't analyze it, I didn't pay much attention to it. If Ermid can glean anything from it, it would be a significant discovery. After a moment of contemplation, just as Merlin was about to speak again, a unique magical fluctuation resonated within his mind. Turning towards the Lesser Grail, he said with a knowing smile, it seems our guests have arrived. Within the Ionian Hittyroi, a shadow fell upon Iskandar's vast army. Looking up, Iskandar's face hardened as he saw the colossal iron giant that blotted out the sun. It seems he intends to utterly obliterate my army. Hold on tight, Waver. Don't fall off, or you'll be crushed. Steering his chariot, Iskandar swiftly retreated from the battlefield, ascending towards the sky. He knew he couldn't remain on the ground. The iron giant above would annihilate everything in its path. Ah! Get out of the way! Evade! Evade! Amidst the chaotic cries, the iron giant, piloted by Mika, crashed down upon the heart of Iskandar's army. The next moment, a violent tempest erupted, sweeping outwards in all directions. Countless soldiers were flung into the air or buried beneath the earth. A natural disaster had descended upon the Ionian Hittyroi, as if a comet had struck the very ground. A mushroom cloud slowly rose from the point of impact. Hold on to me! Even in the sky, Iskandar struggled to maintain control of his chariot as the fierce winds buffeted them. Behind him, Waver, clinging tightly to Iskandar, stared in horror at the iron giant below. What kind of monster is that? Chapter 89 I am victorious, King of Conquerors. A furious tempest raged within the reality marble, reaping the lives of countless soldiers. Even though they were seasoned veterans in life, having faced countless trials and tribulations, they were powerless against the mythical, towering steel giant. Death and despair filled the bounded field. Amidst this devastating onslaught, no living soul remained near Mika. Damn it! I never expected such a power, Iskandar muttered, his expression grim as he gazed upon the colossal steel giant that stood defiantly, radiating divine might. He knew that his reality marble was utterly defenseless against such a being. It was an existence that defied all conventional standards, a power beyond his comprehension. However, only by overcoming such formidable opponents can I truly savor the thrill of conquest. Ha ha ha! Iskandar roared with excitement as he urged his chariot forward, charging towards the steel giant's head, enveloped in a surge of lightning. He aimed for the most vulnerable point. But the steel giant under Mika's control was no sluggish puppet. Seeing the approaching chariot, Mika swung his massive shield towards Iskandar. However, Iskandar was not an opponent to be easily dispatched. With masterful control over his chariot, he narrowly evaded Mika's shield at the last possible moment. But the resulting gust of wind from the shield's swing sent the soldiers who had finally managed to approach Mika's feet scattering once more. However, neither Mika nor Iskandar paid any attention to the ground troops. Their focus was solely on each other. It's been years since I've experienced such exhilarating chariot maneuvering, Iskandar exclaimed, pouring all his concentration into controlling the Gordius wheel's speed and movements as he dodged Mika's relentless attacks. Ah! Watch out! Waver cried, clinging to Iskandar's waist for dear life. While Iskandar had initially managed to evade Mika's attacks with the Gordius wheel's lightning-fast speed, time was running out. Not even 3 minutes had passed, and the chariot had narrowly escaped destruction multiple times. Has he already deciphered my movement patterns? After barely dodging another spear thrust, Iskandar swiftly retreated beyond Mika's attack range. It's no use. We can't break through from the air. I never imagined he could maintain his prowess in such a state. This is incredibly dangerous. Iskandar knew that if this continued, he would inevitably be struck down. And with the steel giant's immense strength, a single blow would likely send him back to the throne of heroes. Now, our only hope lies with those below. Iskandar muttered, his gaze shifting towards the ground beneath Mika's feet. While Mika and Iskandar had been locked in their aerial duel, a group of exceptionally skilled warriors had managed to breach the tempestuous winds surrounding Mika and reach the base of the steel giant. Within Iskandar's reality marble, alongside his veteran soldiers, were numerous heroes from his era. Some of them even surpassed Iskandar in fame and renown. And there were quite a few who rivaled his martial prowess. After all, while Iskandar was a renowned military strategist and a king, he wasn't solely a warrior. His army consisted of diverse heroes, and these individuals had now bypassed the raging winds, reaching Mika's feet. They brandished their weapons, aiming for the steel giant's legs. Clang! The sound of metal clashing against metal reached Mika's ears. Having observed their movements from the beginning, he muttered to himself, not a scratch. It seems my efforts in enveloping the entire armor with a powerful aura weren't in vain. The armor's inherent material strength, the indestructible skill, and the added protection of my aura. The combined defensive capabilities of the steel giant are unparalleled. Unless it's an attack on par with Artoria's holy sword, nothing can breach my defenses. A confident smirk played on Mika's lips. This ultimate technique, steel giant standing upon the earth, had long been a concept due to his limited aura capacity. Therefore, Mika was eager to test its various capabilities and gather data for future improvements. That's why he allowed those warriors to approach. It's important to note that Mika wasn't relying on his eyes to observe them. He was utilizing an advanced application of his aura. Through rigorous training, Mika had expanded his perception range to encompass a 200-meter radius. The defensive capabilities are flawless. After this period of adaptation and experimentation, the steel giant's maneuverability and responsiveness have reached the minimum acceptable standards. Now, the only remaining test is the degree of fusion between different abilities. With that thought, a sly grin spread across Mika's face. In the next moment, under the watchful eyes of everyone present, the steel giant raised its spear horizontally. Then, Mika's voice resonated through the reality marble. Ignite! Become my chariot of flames! This was the incantation for Mika's magic, heavenly fire, annihilation. Unlike the third stage, which required no incantation, the first two stages of heavenly fire, annihilation necessitated a verbal chant. As he chanted, flames erupted from the steel giant's exterior, engulfing it in a fiery embrace. The steel giant, now enveloped in flames, transformed into a blazing inferno, radiating intense heat. It resembled a miniature sun in the heart of the desert, unleashing both light and heat. This is bad. Retreat! Waver shouted from behind Iskandar. This is Mika's magic. After joining the Yahweh Familia, Waver had learned about the intricacies of the Fauna system through Mika's explanations. Therefore, he understood the true meaning behind Mika's chant. Magic? Is he about to unleash his ultimate attack? Although Iskandar was puzzled by Waver's mention of magic, he knew what he had to do. Retreat immediately. Evade the attack. Upon hearing Iskandar's command, the soldiers surrounding Mika began to withdraw hastily. But it was too late. The fierce battle has begun, the mournful horns blare. Dim is the path ahead, bright is the firelight, hope burns fiercely. The flames shall never be extinguished, the blade shall never dull. Fierce flames enveloped the spear in Mika's hand, transforming it from its usual appearance into a spear of pure fire. Triumphant return of the Blazing King's sword. The spear of flames, christened the Blazing King's sword, plunged into the ground before Mika. In the next instant, a sea of fire erupted in the desert, spreading rapidly across the sand. It threatened to engulf the entire sandy landscape, transforming it into a realm of flames. Flames, flames, everywhere flames. That was all Waver could see as he looked down from the gorgeous wheel. The once vast expanse of sand had vanished. All that remained was a raging inferno. And the endless cries of agony. Not a single living being could be seen on the ground, consumed by the flames. Only Iskandar and Waver, circling in the sky on the gorgeous wheel, remained unscathed. Is this the captain's true strength? Since joining the Yahweh Familia, Waver had never doubted Mika's power. After all, he was the captain of a familia capable of traversing worlds. The sheer thought of his strength was terrifying. So, when Mika had assured him of victory in this battle, Waver had accepted it as an absolute certainty. Without hesitation, he had used all of his command spells, leaving himself no room for retreat. He had placed his complete trust in Mika and his abilities. But it was only now that Waver truly grasped the extent of Mika's power. Iskandar had summoned an army of servants. Tens of thousands of them, a force that was unimaginable in its scale. Yet, this invincible army had been annihilated in a single strike. This is truly an eye-opening experience, Iskandar muttered, his voice heavy with awe as he observed the devastation below from beyond Mika's attack range. My prized Ionio Ihitiroi has been utterly destroyed. Waver's gaze shot upwards at Iskandar's words. The sky within the reality marble had begun to crack and shatter, as if symbolizing the imminent collapse of this world. How can this be? Waver exclaimed in disbelief. Didn't I tell you? This landscape is a manifestation of the shared memories of my soldiers and me, a world created by our collective will. Now that they have returned to the throne of heroes, this place can no longer be sustained. Iskandar's gaze was fixed on the distant steel giant as he spoke with a newfound resolve. Hold on tight, we're returning to the real world. In the next moment, the surrounding landscape began to crumble. Sensing the shift, Mika immediately initiated the process of deactivating his current state. Before entering Iskandar's reality marble, they had been standing on the Fuyaki bridge. If he returned in his current form, the bridge would undoubtedly collapse under his immense weight. As Mika had stated, the steel giant was not an illusion. It was a tangible, physical entity. It seems the final battle will be waged in the real world, Mika said calmly, observing the crumbling world around him. With a sudden surge of magical energy, Mika, Iskandar, Waver, and Gabriel reappeared on the Fuyaki bridge. Amazing, Mika! Is this your ultimate technique? It's incredible! Freed from the burden of supplying Mika with magical energy, Gabriel's voice was filled with excitement as she spoke, her previous silence replaced with unrestrained enthusiasm. Of course. After all, I'm a genius. Yes, 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 a great genius. Gabriel agreed readily. While Mika and Gabriel celebrated their victory, Iskandar and Waver stood in silence. Rider! Waver softly called out to the contemplative Iskandar. Iskandar turned to Waver and asked earnestly, there's something I haven't asked you yet. What is it? Waver Velvet, are you willing to follow me as my loyal subject? Waver stared at Iskandar, tears welling up in his eyes. Iskandar's offer was the greatest recognition he could have hoped for. Only why? Only you are my king. I'm willing to sacrifice everything for you. Please, guide me and let me see the same dream you see. Waver's voice trembled with emotion as he responded to Iskandar's question. Very well. Iskandar gently lifted Waver and placed him on the ground. It is my duty as a king to reveal my dreams, and as my subject, your duty is to witness those dreams and pass them down to future generations, Iskandar declared with a hearty laugh. After his passionate proclamation, Iskandar ruffled Waver's hair affectionately. Waver, bear witness to all of this. And then, carry my story forward, tell the world how your king lived a life filled with joy and adventure, tell them of the unparalleled speed and ferocity of Iskandar's conquests. Yes. Waver stood tall, his gaze fixed on Iskandar. He etched this moment, this memory, deep within his heart. Seeing Waver's unwavering determination, Iskandar smiled warmly. He then turned to face Mika, who had been patiently waiting. I apologize for the wait, Mika. It's all right. Take as long as you need. No, all that needs to be said has been said. Now is the time for action to speak louder than words. If that is your will, then come. Here I come. Iskandar roared as he urged his chariot forward, unleashing a torrent of lightning. Crush him, Gordius wheel. Moo. Moo. At Iskandar's command, the two divine bulls charged towards Mika, propelled by bolts of lightning. Iskandar had abandoned all pretense of a prolonged battle. Now, he sought a decisive confrontation. Is this it? Mika watched the approaching chariot with a focused gaze. With a flick of his wrist, 4 gauntlets shot out at a speed that defied Iskandar's reflexes, closing in on him in an instant. Clang! Clang! Moo! The 4 gauntlets, adjusting their size mid-air, seized the necks of the 2 divine bulls and the chariot beside Iskandar. This was another application of Wings of Calamity, forcibly seizing an opponent's noble phantasm mid-battle. Damn it! The sudden halt of the chariot threw Iskandar off balance, but with his exceptional martial arts skills, he adjusted his body mid-air and landed gracefully on the bridge. He continued his charge towards Mika, undeterred. Mika tightened his grip on the 2 swords in his hands, his gaze locked on the charging Iskandar. Haa! Clang! Their swords clashed violently. But within moments, Iskandar's swordsmanship faltered, his blade deflected to the side. Utilizing his transparent world ability to perceive Iskandar's every move, Mika effortlessly plunged his other sword into Iskandar's chest. I am victorious, King of Conquerors. Chapter 90 Artoria's Despair. A Duel of Agony. Ah, it seems I have been defeated. Feeling the sharp pain in his chest, Iskandar conceded with a wry smile. Indeed, engaging in close combat with a warrior like you was a mistake. Your swordsmanship, even the most skilled swordsman among my army pale in comparison. I appreciate your praise, King of Conquerors, Mika replied, accepting Iskandar's compliment with a chuckle. Ha ha ha. Letting out a hearty laugh, Iskandar's form began to fade into shimmering particles of light. As he vanished, he exclaimed with a hint of wistful nostalgia, this expedition was truly exhilarating. With that, he dissolved completely into spiritual particles, disappearing into the night. Mika stood silently for a moment, watching the spot where Iskandar had vanished, before approaching Waver, who was shedding tears. Don't blame yourself, Waver. This is the fate of a servant. I know. Waver replied, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. This was Ryder's choice, the path he chose to take. As his loyal subject, all I can do is record his heroic deeds. Looking at Waver's clear gaze, Mika nodded approvingly. I'm glad you understand. You've grown significantly during this Holy Grail war. It seems my decision was the right one. Waver recalled the moment Mika had instructed him to accompany Iskandar and couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. He was deeply thankful for Mika's decision. Thank you, Mika. You're welcome. After all, you're a member of our Yahweh familia, Mika replied with a gentle smile. He then turned his gaze towards the Gordius wheel, Iskandar's noble phantasm, which had been left behind. Jumping onto the chariot, he stroked the 2 divine bulls that pulled it, a wide grin spreading across his face. This is way cooler than a sports car, wouldn't you say? After a moment of admiration, Mika called out to Waver. Get on, Waver. We're heading to our final destination. Hey? Oh, right. Waver quickly scrambled onto the Gordius wheel. Let's go. Our destination is Mount Enzu. Moo. Following Mika's command, the divine bulls roared and began to gallop, their hooves pounding the ground before they ascended into the sky, speeding towards Mount Enzu. Mount Enzu. Artoria, Kiritsugu Emiya and Mihisa followed the ascending steps, rapidly making their way up the mountain. As expected, Castor has transformed this place into a magical stronghold, Kiritsugu observed calmly, analyzing their surroundings. Stay alert and be prepared for any potential attacks. Understood. Artoria replied, her grip tightening on her sword. She held an unwavering trust in Merlin's magical abilities. That was why she was so cautious now that they were enemies. Suddenly, a gentle voice echoed around them. Welcome. Who's there? The trio swiftly turned towards the source of the voice, their faces edged with vigilance and a readiness to fight. Please, don't be alarmed. I'm not here to fight. Merlin's figure materialized before them amidst a shower of flower petals, his gaze meeting Artoria's furious glare. Merlin. The moment she saw Merlin, Artoria's hand instinctively reached for her sword, her desire to strike him overwhelming. She now knew the truth about Iris Veil von Einsborn's role as the Holy Grail's vessel. She knew that Merlin had captured Iris Veil to use her as a sacrifice. Artoria's eyes blazed with fury. Wait. Kiritsugu stopped her. Merlin, the great sage from the legends of King Arthur, what is your purpose here? Kiritsugu questioned, his voice laced with suspicion. He couldn't comprehend Merlin's actions. I have no grand ambitions. I simply wish to live a peaceful life, Merlin replied with a weary sigh, waving his hand dismissively. I'm merely following my master's orders. He keeps me quite busy, you see. However, I haven't been completely idle. The woman Artoria cares for is unharmed. I've extracted the lesser grail from her body and healed her injuries. You should find her safe and sound when you reach the top. Kiritsugu's pupils constricted, and a wave of relief washed over him, quickly masked by his usual stoic expression. Artoria, however, couldn't contain her joy. She was overjoyed that Iris Veil had escaped her tragic fate. At the same time, her animosity towards Merlin diminished significantly. As expected, Merlin was still the Merlin she knew. What are you planning? Kiritsugu pressed further. What are we planning? You'll witness it firsthand. With that, Merlin turned and walked towards the Ryuadu temple at the summit. Follow me. Without hesitation, Artoria and Kiritsugu followed Merlin towards the mountaintop. As they neared the summit, a figure clad in white appeared before them. Iris Veil. Kiritsugu. Saber. Overjoyed to see them again, Iris Veil, who had feared for her life when she was captured, rushed into Kiritsugu's arms. Standing at the entrance of the Ryuadu temple, Merlin observed the joyous reunion with a melancholic expression before revealing the truth about the Holy Grail. In the previous Holy Grail War, the Einsborn family, desperate for victory, cheated by summoning a servant of the 8th class, the Avenger. Merlin then explained how the Holy Grail had been corrupted. As for why he chose to reveal this information now, Mika had a simple explanation: these individuals, consumed by their obsession with the Holy Grail, wouldn't give up until they witnessed its corruption firsthand. Otherwise, Kiritsugu Emiya wouldn't be Kiritsugu Emiya. As expected, upon hearing Merlin's words, Artoria and Kiritsugu's faces were etched with doubt, but they didn't fully believe him. Impossible, Artoria muttered, unable to accept such a devastating truth. That's why I told you before that your wish cannot be granted. Not only is your wish foolish, but the Holy Grail itself is no longer capable of fulfilling wishes as intended. I know you won't believe me, but I can show you proof. But before that... Merlin chuckled, gesturing upwards. Artoria, an old comrade awaits you. Ah! Ya-a-a-a-se. With an enraged roar, Berserker, shrouded in black mist, emerged from the Ryuadu temple. It was Lancelot. Ya-a-a-a-se. Enveloped in a dark mist, radiating an aura of pure malice, Berserker stood atop Ryuadu temple, his gaze fixed on Artoria below. Due to Mika's promise and the strong restraints placed upon him, Lancelot had refrained from entering a full-blown rampage despite encountering Artoria on several occasions. Furthermore, his noble phantasm, for someone's glory, possessed the ability to conceal his identity, preventing even Artoria, his former comrade, from recognizing him. Now, after a long and agonizing wait, Lancelot finally received the fulfillment of Mika's promise. A one-on-one duel with Artoria. And the chance to die by her hand. Ya-a-a-a-se. Lancelot's enraged roar intensified the shock on Artoria's face. Merlin, you said this was our comrade. Artoria's voice was filled with disbelief, but deep down, she already had a strong suspicion about Berserker's true identity. Although his madness had initially clouded her judgment, upon learning that he was a former ally, the image of Berserker's ferocious fighting style began to overlap with a specific person in her memory. Indeed. Although I'm also shocked by his current state, the fact remains that he was once our comrade, Merlin replied, his voice heavy with sorrow. He, too, wished he could avoid witnessing this tragic scene. Ah! Artoria bit her lip, her gaze fixed on the rampaging figure. Is that you, Sir Lancelot? She asked, her voice filled with anguish. Lancelot's only response was a mournful, enraged roar. Ya-a-a-a-se. A-a-a-a-a-a-a. How could this happen? Irisveil exclaimed, covering her mouth in shock. As far as she knew, Lancelot was hailed as the Knight of the Flower, the strongest knight of the Round Table. Although he had ultimately caused the downfall of Camelot, his valor and strength were undeniable. Yet, here he was, reduced to a mindless beast, a stark contrast to his former glory. Irisveil glanced at Artoria with concern. She worried about the impact this encounter would have on Artoria, already burdened by guilt and sorrow. Do you hate me that much, Sir Lancelot? Artoria was filled with confusion. Why had this knight, once a symbol of honor and loyalty, fallen into such a state? Was it her fault? She suddenly recalled the words of Sir Tristan, another knight of the Round Table. The king does not understand the human heart. Is all of this my fault? Artoria gripped her sword tighter, her mind flooded with memories, including Iskandar's harsh criticism of her leadership. She was lost in a sea of doubt and confusion. Her gaze fell upon Merlin, seeking guidance. No matter what happened in the past, it cannot be undone. You must face this challenge alone. Even if it causes you pain, this is your responsibility, the burden you bear as the king who carries the hopes of many. With those words, Merlin fell silent. He turned to Kiritsugu, Irisveil, and Miri. Leave them be. Come with me. Kiritsugu hesitated for a moment before following Merlin. He had no choice but to comply. Although leaving Saber's side was dangerous, the current situation was dire. They were outnumbered, 2 servants against Artoria alone. Moreover, these 2 servants were Artoria's former mentor and comrade, making it difficult for her to fight at her full potential. They knew each other far too well. Furthermore, they were within Merlin's magical territory. If Artoria became preoccupied with Lancelot, Merlin could easily eliminate them. Although Merlin was a mage, Kiritsugu was unsure if his origin bullets would be effective against him. After all, this was Merlin, the legendary magus. After a brief moment of contemplation, Kiritsugu led Irisveil and Miri, following Merlin deeper into the temple. They soon arrived at the central altar of Ryuadu Temple. There, the once illusory Lesser Grail had solidified, seemingly on the verge of manifesting fully. Let us wait here, Merlin said, a cryptic smile playing on his lips as he met Kiritsugu's questioning gaze. I told you, the Holy Grail has been corrupted. If you don't believe me, then witness it with your own eyes. At this moment, the only servants remaining in this Holy Grail war are myself, Artoria, and Lancelot. Looking at the state of the Lesser Grail, Merlin knew that Iskandar had already been eliminated. Furthermore, the battle outside will soon conclude. After all, Lancelot's wish is to receive the king's judgment and die by her hand. Therefore, the Holy Grail's descent is imminent. We simply need to wait. Is that so? Irisveil gasped, covering her mouth with her hand once more. She couldn't believe that the rampaging knight harbored such a tragic wish. Her concern for Artoria grew. She worried about the devastating impact this revelation would have on her. While we wait, Mr. Emiya, and you 2 ladies, why don't you ponder something? Merlin's words snapped Irisveil out of her worried thoughts. Ponder what? What you should do if what I've said is true. Kiritsugu's face hardened with worry. Honestly, he was inclined to believe Merlin, given his demeanor and the current situation. However, his unwavering commitment to his ideals as a magus killer prevented him from accepting defeat. If this is true, what should I do? Kiritsugu pondered, his heart filled with uncertainty. Ha ha ha! This is way more exhilarating than a fighter jet. Mika roared with laughter as he steered the gorgeous wheel, reveling in the thrill of the ride. Although the fighter jets he and Gilgamesh had raced through the sky were faster, Mika preferred the raw power and majesty of the chariot. Hey, Mika, slow down! Waver shouted, struggling against the wind as it whipped through his hair. Despite experiencing this several times before, he still hadn't gotten used to it. Ha! If we slow down, we'll miss the Holy Grail's descent. With Mount Enzu in sight, Mika urged the gorgeous wheel forward, charging up the mountain path at breakneck speed. Thanks to the chariot's lightning-fast speed, Mika and Waver quickly reached the summit. They were greeted by the sight of a fierce battle between 2 servants. Artoria and Lancelot. The former king and her strongest knight were locked in a deadly duel. Chapter 91 The True Holy Grail and Grimanu. Has it begun? Mika landed the Gordius wheel smoothly on the ground, his gaze fixed on the ongoing battle, a somber expression on his face. It was a particularly tragic fight. Two individuals, denied redemption, clashed fiercely. Each driven by their own desperate desires. One sought to overcome all enemies, achieve ultimate victory, and claim the wish-granting Holy Grail. The other yearned for a final, all-out battle, culminating in death at the hands of their opponent. Perhaps it was a mutual longing for release. Shaking his head, Mika turned away and addressed Waver. Let's go. We're leaving. Hey? Aren't we going to watch? No. Looking up at the dark sky, Mika spoke with a resolute tone. This battle doesn't need witnesses. Even if it did, it wouldn't be us. With that, Mika steered the Gordius wheel towards the central altar of Ryadu Temple. You're back, Mika! Merlin exclaimed, his voice laced with disbelief, as he saw Mika's unscathed form. You defeated Iskandar just like that? Without any injuries? Can't you tell whether I'm injured or not? Mika chuckled, jumping down from the Gordius wheel. He then turned his attention to Kiritsugu Emiya and Irisveil von Einsburn. Yo, good evening to you both. Good evening. Irisveil responded hesitantly, while Kiritsugu remained silent. Mika simply smiled and said nothing more, his focus shifting to the lesser grail in the distance. He held no particular fondness or animosity towards Kiritsugu Emiya. While Kiritsugu possessed a cold and ruthless nature, as long as he didn't harm Mika's friends, Mika had no intention of interfering with him. As for why he had summoned Kiritsugu to witness the descent of the Grail? It was simply because Kiritsugu was Artoria's master. There was no other reason. Gabriel. I'm here. Upon hearing Mika's call, Gabriel, who had received her instructions earlier, flew towards the Grail suspended in mid-air. Mika, now that you're back, I'll go check on Artoria. All right, don't forget to bring my sword back. Merlin couldn't help but roll his eyes at Mika's words. The sword Mika referred to was Lancelot's holy blade, erudite. As a weapon master with a penchant for collecting powerful artifacts, how could Mika possibly resist claiming the holy sword wielded by his own servant? Erudite had already been converted into one of Mika's non-weapons. However, Lancelot possessed the same ability, Knight does not die with empty hands, which allowed him to temporarily manifest it as his noble phantasm once more. This was precisely why Mika had chosen to convert Lancelot's noble phantasm so early. All right, I understand, Merlin said dismissively, his figure vanishing before their eyes. Thus, only Mika, Kiritsugu, Irisveil, and Waver remained. Glancing at Mika and Waver, a thought crossed Kiritsugu's mind. If he were to kill Mika here, perhaps he could turn the tide of the war. He was currently facing a desperate situation. Although he hadn't lost yet, and according to Merlin's plan, Artoria was one of the two finalists, he was trapped within enemy territory, with no escape route in sight. Considering Merlin's ability to effortlessly abduct Irisveil from Artoria's side using illusions, Kiritsugu believed that even if Merlin killed him, Artoria might remain oblivious. This highlighted the perilous situation he was in. If the Holy Grail was indeed corrupted as Merlin claimed, then his participation in the Holy Grail war had been in vain. And even if it was a lie, he was still in grave danger, with Merlin holding a metaphorical blade to his throat, ready to strike at any moment. Therefore, despite not having lost yet, Kiritsugu had no realistic path to victory. However, if he eliminated Mika here, everything could change. Perhaps he could still salvage the situation. After a moment of contemplation, Kiritsugu abandoned this tempting idea. There were too many factors influencing his decision. Firstly, after questioning Irisveil, he now believed Merlin's claims to be 80% true. The remaining 20% was fueled by his own stubborn refusal to give up. At this point, preserving Irisveil's life was more important than grasping at a desperate chance for victory. Secondly, for his plan to succeed, Mika had to be Merlin's master. However, the Matu faction clearly had two masters, and the other one had remained hidden throughout the conflict. Kiritsugu couldn't afford to gamble on Mika's true identity. Was he Merlin's master or Lancelot's? Finally, there was a high probability that he simply couldn't defeat Mika. He had observed Mika's battle against Gilgamesh within Ionio I Hitiroi from afar. Mika's combat prowess, capable of rivaling a servant, was far beyond what an ordinary person like him could handle. Moreover, what had Mika said upon his return? He had single-handedly defeated Iskandar, the king of conquerors. With such overwhelming strength, if they clashed, Kiritsugu and Irisveal would likely be swiftly subdued, with no chance to retaliate. Therefore, after careful consideration, Kiritsugu dismissed the idea of assassination. Meanwhile, sensing Kiritsugu's gaze, Mika turned his head and met his eyes, a knowing smile on his face. At that moment, a thought struck Mika. Kiritsugu Emiya, I know about you, Mika said, his gaze fixed on the stoic Magus. While you're still waiting for definitive proof, I believe you've already made your decision in your heart, haven't you? But have you considered other possibilities? What possibilities? Kiritsugu asked calmly, his expression unchanged. Your future, for instance. Have you not considered the possibility that if you fail, you might never see your daughter, Ilya, again? Ilya? Kiritsugu's voice suddenly rose in intensity. Of course he had thought about it. On the very first day of the Holy Grail War, after learning that he was being targeted by Kaire Koto Mine, he had contemplated escaping. With Artoria's help, they could return to the Einsburn castle and reclaim his daughter, Ilya. But that plan had ultimately failed. And now it was too late. I can help you achieve that wish. I can bring your daughter back and even help restore her health. What do you think of this offer? Mika asked with a sly smile. He was suddenly curious to see whether Ilya, with this altered fate, would become the legendary magical girl Ilya. Mika was curious. Would Ilya, raised by Kiritsugu and Irisveal and living a happy life, still embark on the path of a magical girl? Of course, this morbid curiosity was just a fleeting thought. His true objective was something else entirely. What do you want? Kiritsugu's voice was serious, his hand clenching into a fist within his pocket as Mika's words struck a nerve. Naturally, I want Saber, Mika replied calmly, as Irisveal gasped in surprise. The reason Mika proposed this trade was for Merlin's sake. As Artoria's mentor, Merlin deeply desired her redemption, her release from endless suffering. According to the original timeline, this task would have fallen upon Shiro Emiya. However, Mika was almost certain that Shiro would never appear in this altered timeline. The fate that brought Shiro and Kiritsugu together had been disrupted by Mika's actions. Thus, Artoria's redemption had become a distant possibility. That's when Mika had a sudden realization. Rather than allowing her to return to the throne of heroes, where she would be tormented by the burdens of her past, wouldn't it be better to keep her in the present world as a valuable ally? Perhaps, amidst the prosperity of the future, she might one day awaken to the truth and find her salvation. While this approach was uncertain, it was still far better than endlessly waiting for an opportunity that might never come within the confines of the throne of heroes. After all, no matter how long she waited, her wish would never be fulfilled. Saber. Upon hearing Mika's request, Kiritsugu instantly understood their intentions. They aimed to purify the corrupted Greater Grail. This made sense. Obtaining Artoria's master rights held no strategic value for Mika at this point, as victory was already within their grasp. Moreover, servants were bound to return to the throne of heroes once the Holy Grail War concluded, unless there was a way to keep them in the present world. If Artoria could remain, then Merlin, from the Mata faction, could also stay. A powerful magus like Merlin, coupled with their ability to manipulate the Grail. Kiritsugu's mind raced as the pieces fell into place. The corruption of the Greater Grail was real, but that didn't mean it was beyond saving. After all, the Holy Grail War was a ritual created by the Einsburns, Tosaka, and Mata families. While it was undoubtedly a powerful artifact, it wasn't necessarily beyond the capabilities of a magus like Merlin to repair it. So, what they lacked was time. Their plan involved the period after the current Holy Grail War and before the next one. And to achieve this, they needed to start gathering allies now. This realization sparked a flicker of hope within Kiritsugu's weary heart, but he quickly extinguished it. Even if they could restore the Greater Grail, it no longer held any significance for him. His priorities were Irisveal and Ilya. I accept your terms, Kiritsugu declared resolutely, having confirmed the Grail's corruption. Kiritsugu. Irisveal's voice was filled with anguish as she gripped his arm tightly. Although Artoria was merely a servant, they had formed a close bond during their time together. Irisveal considered her a dear friend. Yet, Kiritsugu was willing to give her up. And all for the sake of Ilya. This decision tore at Irisveal's heart. Sensing her pain, Kiritsugu turned to her and offered a comforting smile. Entrusting Saber to them is the best outcome, both for us and for Saber. We no longer have a chance to obtain the Holy Grail, but they still do. By their side, Saber might still have a chance to fulfill her wish. Wouldn't that be better for her than staying with us? Iris Veil's expression softened as she listened to Kiritsugu's words. She nodded slowly, a bittersweet smile on her lips. Indeed. Artoria's mentor, Merlin, was also part of their faction. Perhaps, with them, Artoria might truly achieve her tragic yet noble dream. Yes, as Kiritsugu said, this is the best outcome, Mika affirmed with a gentle smile. Suddenly, Mika felt a strange sensation coursing through his body. In an instant, the connection between him and Lancelot vanished. Simultaneously, the Lesser Grail on the altar reached completion, radiating a brilliant light. It seems the battle between Artoria and Lancelot has concluded, Mika murmured, looking at his hand. Kiritsugu cursed inwardly as he witnessed this scene. As I suspected, you weren't Merlin's master. He must have been hiding in a safe location, patiently awaiting victory. Relieved by his accurate judgment, Kiritsugu's heart pounded with anticipation. He looked up at the Lesser Grail, his gaze filled with a strange sense of acceptance. He had chosen to believe Merlin's words, and now he was merely witnessing the inevitable. As Kiritsugu watched, a black sludge began to pour out of the Grail, rapidly overflowing and dripping down. Below, the vessel of emptiness, an untool crafted by Gabriel, swiftly collected the black ooze, containing it within its confines. According to the rules of the Holy Grail War, when only 2 servants remained, the Grail would manifest, revealing its glory to the finalists. Once the victor was decided, it would grant their wish. However, the corrupted Grail's display of glory involved unleashing its inner darkness upon the world, showcasing its destructive nature. But now, the black mud was being contained within the vessel of emptiness. This was an untool that Mika had commissioned Gabriel to create, specifically designed to counter the black mud within the Grail. As a master researcher who had long studied the Holy Grail system, Gabriel had swiftly fulfilled Mika's request. Thanks to her creation, the surrounding area of Mount Enzo would be spared from the Grail's corruption. This is the Holy Grail. Kiritsugu's face contorted in disgust as he stared at the black mud oozing from the Grail. He sensed pure, unadulterated malice emanating from the dark substance. Is this the collective malice of humanity? Ungramenu, all the evils of this world, that was the true nature of the black mud. Mika, I'll transfer Saber's command spells to you now, Kiritsugu said hurriedly, his voice strained. As a magus who aspired to be a hero of justice, he couldn't bear to remain in this place any longer. He had wasted years pursuing this corrupted artifact. The thought was unbearable. Let's go home, Iris Veil, he said, turning to his wife, his face edged with despair. In this moment, the dream of the magus killer, the hero of justice, shattered completely. Chapter 92 The Holy Grail War is over. Saber new master. Leaning on her sword, which was plunged into the ground, Artoria hung her head, her face hidden in the shadows. Sir Lancelot. Whispering Lancelot's name, Artoria appeared incredibly vulnerable. Opposite her, the holy sword, erudite, gleamed under the moonlight, its blade radiating a sharp brilliance. Whoosh! With the sound of a sword being drawn, the white-haired incubus, clad in mage robes, pulled the holy sword from the ground and held it before his face, admiring its sharpness. It was Merlin. Having witnessed the conclusion of the battle between Artoria and Lancelot, Merlin, who only appeared before her at the end of their story, couldn't help but sigh. Artoria, can you still not accept the past? I cannot accept it. Slightly raising her head, Artoria's eyes shone with unwavering determination. Such stubbornness! Merlin muttered, a troubled expression on his face. Just who instilled such a stubborn personality in her? Oh, it was me? Never mind then. Merlin threw his hands up in exasperation. He had no way to deal with Artoria's stubbornness. Otherwise, he wouldn't have allowed her to wallow in the pain of the past for so long. Just as Merlin was about to continue his persuasion, a sharp gasp escaped Artoria's lips. What's happening? A shiver ran through her body as her eyes widened in disbelief. Her master had just been changed. Oh, I didn't expect Mika to do that. It's quite surprising, Merlin chuckled, instantly understanding Artoria's situation. I thought he would simply remain a spectator. He grasped Mika's intentions. In truth, he had considered doing the same, but such an act required the other party's willingness, not a hidden agenda. Otherwise, it would be meaningless. It seems my journey in reality will be longer than I anticipated, Merlin mused, gazing towards the distant altar, a smile playing on his lips. Mika. Hearing Merlin's words, Artoria realized the identity of her new master. Fury flashed in her eyes as she dashed towards the altar, where a powerful magical energy was emanating. Is she angry? Watching Artoria vanish swiftly, propelled by her invisible air boundary field, Merlin paused for a moment before comprehending her thoughts. Does she think Mika killed her master? Hold on, that's a misunderstanding. Merlin hurriedly chased after her. As Merlin had suspected, Artoria believed her master was in danger. Based on her understanding of Kiritsugu Emiya, a typical threat wouldn't compel him to relinquish his command spells. Something must have happened to Irisveil von Einsborn. That was why Artoria was so frantic. Artoria was unaware that if the Holy Grail hadn't been tainted in this particular Holy Grail war, Kiritsugu wouldn't have prioritized Irisveil's safety. If Merlin hadn't brought Irisveil to the Ryuadu temple, the designated location for the final battle, Kiritsugu might have abandoned her. After all, Kiritsugu had already sacrificed too much in pursuit of his twisted sense of justice. Kiritsugu wasn't a cold-hearted person. On the contrary, he harbored a passionate heart. However, he buried his emotions deep within, never expressing them outwardly. Irisveil. Shouting Irisveil's name, Artoria arrived at the altar where Mika and the others were gathered. She quickly assessed the situation. Mika and Waver stood on one side of the altar. Kiritsugu Emiya, Irisveil von Einsborn, and Mihisa stood on the other. And there was a young girl floating near the Holy Grail? Despite the confusing scene, Artoria rushed to Irisveil's side, shielding her protectively. Hold on, Artoria, you're on the wrong side, Mika chuckled, raising his hand to reveal the command spells on his back. I'm your master now. I do not recognize this bond. As the King of Knights, Artoria adhered to her own code of chivalry. Therefore, simply seizing the command spells wouldn't be enough to change her allegiance. What despicable means did you use to steal my contract from my master? I didn't use any despicable means. Impossible. Saber. Irisveil's voice called out from behind Artoria. Irisveil, I will protect you, Artoria vowed. Irisveil gently shook her head and pointed towards the nearby Lesser Grail. Look over there, Saber. Following Irisveil's gaze, Artoria finally noticed the manifestation of the Holy Grail. The next moment, she was horrified by the black mud oozing from the Grail. What is that? As Merlin mentioned earlier, the Holy Grail has been tainted. Therefore, our Holy Grail war is over, Irisveil said sadly. Her sorrow wasn't for herself but for the young girl before her. The Holy Grail war is over. Indeed, if the Holy Grail, the object of their fierce competition, no longer possessed the power to grant wishes, then their war was effectively over. So, Kiritsugu relinquished his contract with me? Artoria asked, disbelief evident in her voice. That's correct, Kiritsugu replied calmly. This is the best outcome for both you and us. What do you mean? By becoming his servant, he can help you achieve your wish. If Artoria's wish had any chance of being fulfilled, Merlin would have granted it long ago. For a magus of Merlin's caliber, omnipotence wasn't an exaggeration. With enough magical energy, he could achieve anything the Holy Grail could, and perhaps even more. As for where to obtain such vast amounts of magical energy, he could gradually accumulate it. After all, the Holy Grail's power was merely 60 years' worth of magical energy gathered from the ley lines. Given Merlin's millennia of experience, he could achieve it if he truly desired it. But Artoria's wish was inherently impossible to fulfill. Sensing Artoria's gaze, Merlin quickly adopted a calm and composed expression. Wishes and such can wait. First, let's reel in this stubborn little Artoria. Merlin, will you leave after the Holy Grail war? Of course not. You know my true self resides in Avalon. As long as I wish, I can stay here indefinitely. As long as you wish, you can stay indefinitely. Repeating Merlin's words, Artoria's eyes narrowed. She would never forget the pain she felt when Merlin disappeared from her life. Shaking her head, she pushed her anger aside and turned to Kiritsugu and Irisveil behind her. What are your plans now, Irisveil? We'll probably return to the Einsborn estate and bring Ilya back, Irisveil replied, a happy smile gracing her face as she envisioned a brighter future. We might need your help then, Saber. Looking at Irisveil's smile, Artoria nodded slightly. After learning about Iris Veil's past, Artoria had developed a deep sense of protectiveness towards her. Now, seeing her finally able to pursue happiness, Artoria offered her heartfelt blessings. "Don't worry, I'll help if I can." With a nod, Artoria approached Mika. Since Mika hadn't used any underhanded tactics to gain ownership of her contract, Artoria felt no resistance towards him. "Servant Saber, Artoria, pledges her loyalty to you. Are you my master?" "Indeed," Mika replied with a gentle smile. "Then the contract is established." With Artoria's acceptance, their magical energy circuits connected, solidifying their bond. Witnessing the formation of their contract, Kiritsugu turned to Iris Veil and said, "Let's go home, Iris." "Yes, I'll follow you, Kiritsugu." They exchanged a knowing glance and nodded in agreement. "Mika, we'll be waiting for you at the mansion where we took Iris Veil," Kiritsugu said, turning back to address Mika with a serious expression. "Don't worry, I won't go back on my word." "Good." With that, Kiritsugu and Iris Veil departed, heading down Mount Enzu. Kiritsugu, Iris Veil and Mika walked in silence, their minds still reeling from the events at the altar. The Holy Grail, it was nothing like they had imagined. As they descended the mountain and prepared to return to Fuyaki City, Kiritsugu suddenly tensed. "Who's there?" "Kiritsugu Emiya, I've finally found you." Emerging from the surrounding forest, Kaire Kotomine blocked their path, his expression impassive. "It's him, Kaire Kotomine." Iris Veil and Mika tensed at the sight of him. During Dire Muid's attack on the Einsburn castle, Kaire had suddenly appeared, searching for Kiritsugu's whereabouts. They had fought him then, suffering a devastating defeat. "I had a feeling we would cross paths again." "Stay back, Iris, Mika." Kiritsugu drew his pistol, his face betraying no emotion. Now that his dream of being a hero of justice had been shattered, he was determined to protect his family. He would settle things with Kaire here and now. Excellent timing. 6 black keys materialized in Kaire's hands. Both men locked eyes, ready to strike. The next moment, they charged towards each other. "Now, it's just us," Mika mused, gazing at the Holy Grail in the sky after Kiritsugu's departure. "Gabriel, how's the collection going?" "It's still early. At this rate, it will probably take another day." "No worries, we'll wait patiently." Due to its corruption, the magical energy within the Holy Grail had been transformed into black mud. With only 2 participants remaining in the Holy Grail War, the Grail had finally opened a gateway to the physical world, and the black mud was pouring out relentlessly. Therefore, Mika and his companions' task was to seal this gateway and bring an end to the Holy Grail War. Once the war concluded, Merlin and Gabriel would have ample time to purify the Grail completely, revealing its true form. As for why they were using the Vessel of Heaven to continuously collect the black mud, it was not only to prevent it from contaminating the surrounding area but also to drain the Grail's internal magical energy reserves. Only then could the Holy Grail War truly end. Furthermore, Mika had another idea, creating a portable magical energy source. Similar to the tailed beasts within Naruto Uzumaki in the Naruto series, the black mud collected by the Vessel of Heaven could be stored within Gabriel's body for Mika to utilize. This would effectively compensate for Mika's limited magical capacity. Perhaps we could create numerous devices similar to the Holy Grail, bury them in the ley lines of other worlds to accumulate magical energy, and use them as natural batteries, Mika suggested, a spark of inspiration in his eyes. Gabriel pondered his words for a moment before replying, "If we combine it with your abilities, Mika, it could be a viable option." Mika possessed the ability to manipulate the flow of time between his world and other worlds. He frequently used this ability to slow down the passage of time in other worlds, effectively freezing them in a specific moment until his next visit. This was an incredibly convenient ability. However, by reversing its application, they could achieve the effect Mika had described. For instance, they could create a device similar to the Holy Grail, bury it within the ley lines of another world, and then return to their own world, manipulating the flow of time. This way, while only a few minutes or even seconds passed for Mika, 60 years would have elapsed in the other world. The device buried within the ley lines would be fully charged with magical energy. This would ensure that Mika never lacked energy again. "Let's make a note of it. We can research it further when we have more time," Mika said, gazing at the Holy Grail with a smile. The Holy Grail War is finally over. This particular Holy Grail War had felt remarkably easy for Mika. This wasn't an illusion. His greatest adversary in this war had been Gilgamesh, the King of Heroes. Once Gilgamesh was eliminated, Mika, with his superior intelligence and knowledge, had effectively secured victory. The Holy Grail War was essentially over after the second night. Recalling his confrontation with Gilgamesh, Mika's face filled with pride. Although Gilgamesh might not have fought seriously until the very end, Mika's victory was undeniable. Now, all that's left is to clean up the loose ends, Mika said with satisfaction. Chapter 93 Heavens Feel. Nen and Magic Converge. Hey? You're saying that Kiritsugu Emiya and Kaire Kotomine are fighting at the foot of Mount Enzu. Hearing Meli's report, Mika, who had been trying to alleviate his boredom by reading, suddenly sat up with excitement. Although the Holy Grail War hadn't officially concluded, in Mika's eyes, it was nearing its end. All he needed to do was wait patiently for Gabriel to extract 1/6 of the black mud from the Holy Grail and then seal the opening. Therefore, Mika found himself with nothing to do. He felt that the Holy Grail War he participated in had a rather lackluster ending. This could only be blamed on Gilgamesh, the king of heroes, dying too early. That was why he was so excited upon receiving Meli's report. Because Merlin had transformed the entire Mount Enzu into a massive magic circle, Meli, who had gained a considerable understanding of type moon mage craft, took on the task of monitoring the surrounding area to hone her skills. She had deployed numerous familiars around Mount Enzu to observe the situation outside the magic circle. Therefore, when Kiritsugu Emiya and Kaire Kotomine clashed, she was immediately aware of it. So, what was the outcome? Mika asked eagerly. The outcome? Kiritsugu Emiya gained the upper hand. After all, besides his own abilities, he also has Iris Veil von Einsborn supporting him. He's not like Artoria, bound by a knight's code of honor. Artoria frowned upon hearing Meli's words. She suddenly realized that this otherworldly Merlin was just as annoying as the original. After becoming Mika's servant, Merlin took her aside and explained Mika and his companion's unique circumstances. After all, as long-term partners, basic information sharing was necessary. Therefore, Artoria naturally learned about the connection between Meli and Merlin. As a result, Artoria held some fondness for Meli. But now, it seemed that fondness might have been premature. However, although Kiritsugu Emiya emerged victorious, Kaire Kotomine didn't die, Meli continued. Just as Kaire Kotomine was cornered, his father, Raisei Kotomine, a priest of the Holy Church, rescued him. Raisei Kotomine? Mika inquired curiously. In his opinion, even Tokiomi Tosaka had a higher chance of rescuing Kaire than his own father. After all, Raisei had lived with his son for decades without truly understanding the darkness that lurked within him. I understand what you mean. But perhaps the incident with Kaire Kotomine earlier changed Raisei Kotomine's perception of him. Meli suggested. That's certainly a possibility, Mika said, stroking his chin thoughtfully. As the priest responsible for the Fuyaki region, and someone bold enough to participate in the Holy Grail War and even resort to cheating, Raisei Kotomine couldn't be as naive as he appeared. It was likely that Kaire Kotomine's exceptional acting skills had deceived him. However, Kaire's recent actions must have raised suspicions. While his master was engaged in a decisive battle, Kaire had gone to confront Kiritsugu Emiya. Such a blatant display of obsession towards a specific individual was probably something Raisei Kotomine had never witnessed before. Therefore, it was only natural for him to become suspicious. It seems the conflict between Kaire Kotomine and Kiritsugu Emiya will continue, Mika said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. After all, these two were a famous pairing in his previous life. I wonder what kind of story will unfold between them, Mika chuckled, amused by the possibilities. Seeing Mika's amusement, Meli, though unaware of the reason behind his laughter, joined in. Suddenly, she grabbed Mika's arm excitedly. Mika, I want to ride that chariot at the entrance. Take me for a ride. The chariot? You mean the Gordius wheel? Yes. Mika immediately turned to Gabriel. Gabriel, how do I convert those divine bulls as well? Divine bulls? You want to transform them into Nen beasts? Exactly. Mika was fond of Iskandar's Gordius wheel, but there was a problem with its conversion. As everyone knew, a chariot consisted of the vehicle itself and the beasts that pulled it. While Mika's Nen transformation could convert the chariot into his Nen tool, that wasn't enough. The crucial element was the two divine bulls. However, they were similar to servants and couldn't be converted like the chariot itself. The only reason they hadn't vanished along with Iskandar was that Mika had grasped their necks with his gauntlets and was using his magical energy to sustain their existence. But he couldn't absorb them into his body and take them to other worlds, transforming them into non-beasts. Gabriel pondered, looking towards the divine bulls. It should be possible. However, it would be better to set the condition as transforming spiritual bodies into non-beasts. That should increase the success rate. That's fine. Spiritual bodies is sufficient, Mika said, a sly smile spreading across his face. For non-users, it wasn't always possible to acquire any ability they desired. They needed a so-called trigger. For example, Killua's ability to transmute his aura into electricity stemmed from his childhood training in enduring electric shocks, which served as his trigger. Therefore, a non-user's abilities were often related to their personal experiences, making them easier to develop. Under normal circumstances, the ability Mika proposed would be beyond his reach. However, with Gabriel's guidance, she could design a series of training methods and techniques to help him perfect this ability. The training for this ability is quite simple. You just need to utilize this, Gabriel said, pointing towards the Lesser Grail, which was continuously oozing black mud. You mean, the Holy Grail? Precisely. As a vessel containing the third magic, Heaven's Feel, if you carefully attune yourself to it, you can quickly develop this ability. The third magic, Heaven's Feel. Known as materialization of the soul, it was one of the 5 great magics. Once mastered, this magic would turn the user into a perpetual motion machine, granting them an infinite supply of magical energy. Furthermore, their physical body would be reconstructed based on their soul, creating the perfect form and granting them immortality. Without abilities specifically targeting the soul, it would be impossible to harm them. The process of transforming heroic spirits into servants utilized the principles of Heaven's Feel. Therefore, if one could deeply understand the knowledge related to this magic, developing an ability to transform spiritual bodies into non-beasts would be relatively straightforward. The third magic, Heaven's Feel. Mika looked at the Lesser Grail floating in midair and chuckled. It seems my magical studies will have to begin sooner than I anticipated. The Holy Grail War ended rather uneventfully. The repair of the hole pierced by the Holy Grail was equally uneventful. Without any unexpected twists or turns, everything came to a peaceful conclusion. After the Holy Grail War, Mika and his companions returned to the Matter residence and resumed their peaceful studies. Compared to the profound depths of magecraft in this world, the Holy Grail War was merely a single magical ritual. Mika and his companions were far more interested in the broader field of magecraft than the Holy Grail itself. Thus, their studies began anew. Even Mika, who hadn't initially intended to delve too deeply into magecraft, now found himself immersed in its intricacies. After all, he aimed to comprehend the third magic and create an ability to transform spiritual bodies into non-beasts. Therefore, despite being the victors of the Holy Grail War, Mika and his companions didn't achieve widespread fame in this world. They remained relatively unknown. During their period of study, several members of their group departed. Artoria and Merlin were the first to leave. They planned to accompany Kiritsugu Emiya back to the Einsborn castle to rescue Ilias Veal von Einsborn. Mika had made a promise to Kiritsugu, and he wouldn't break his word. Furthermore, Merlin intended to take Artoria on a journey through Britain, allowing her to witness the current state of the land she once ruled. In addition to Merlin and Artoria's departure, Waver also left. He embarked on a solo journey around the world, seemingly determined to retrace Iskandar's footsteps and experience the vastness of the King of Conquerors' ambitions firsthand. It's wonderful, isn't it? They're all individuals with grand dreams, Mika said with a wistful smile, gazing at the starry sky outside the window. Unfortunately, my dreams lie elsewhere. After a moment of reflection, Mika returned his attention to the book in his hands. It was a grimoire on the third magic written by Gabriel based on her own understanding. If this book were to appear in the magecraft community, countless families would bankrupt themselves trying to acquire it. After all, magic was the closest one could get to the root. By the way, Gabriel, how is your research progressing? Mika asked. Are you referring to the Holy Sword's protection on that King Arthur? Gabriel replied, pausing her writing of another grimoire on magecraft and looking at Mika with a questioning gaze. She had been juggling numerous research projects recently. Unlike their previous experiences, the abilities in the Demon Slayer world were relatively simple. Gabriel could easily comprehend, replicate, and enhance them without much difficulty. However, the rich and diverse magical knowledge in the Type Moon world was incredibly stimulating for Gabriel. As a goddess, her greatest fear was boredom. And now, in this world, there was a vast amount of knowledge inherited from the age of gods waiting to be explored. Even the most basic magic held immense potential for future development. The mages of the Type Moon world weren't solely focused on combat. Their ultimate goal was to reach the root. It was akin to scientists pursuing the fundamental truths of the universe. This kind of world captivated Gabriel even more. Therefore, since arriving in this world, Gabriel's research had never ceased. She had initiated countless research projects, each with its own unique focus. However, the topic Mika inquired about was the Holy Sword's protection on Artoria, or research project Gabriel had initiated after thoroughly examining Artoria's body. As the undefeated king, from the moment Artoria drew the Holy Sword, her time had been frozen. She wouldn't age or die. Because this protection was granted to her upon drawing the Holy Sword, Gabriel referred to it as the Holy Sword's protection. Naturally, Gabriel was fascinated by this ability. After all, it concerned Mika's lifespan. Yahweh would never allow Mika to die. Therefore, she had been constantly searching for ways to extend his life. Now, this ability had finally appeared before her eyes, and she was understandably thrilled. Her excited exclamation had echoed throughout the entire Matu mansion. That was why Mika had inquired about her progress during his free time. Yes, that's the one, Mika confirmed. To be honest, I've thoroughly researched the Holy Sword's protection. However, I haven't found a way to apply it to you yet, Gabriel explained. But there's no need to worry. After all, your bodies are still developing. You wouldn't want to remain in your current state forever, would you? Well, that would be rather difficult to accept, Mika replied, recalling Ermid's physique. Throughout their journey, starting from their adventures in the Danmachi world and continuing through various other worlds, Mika and his companions had spent over 2 years in different realities. However, because Mika had spent an initial year and a half traveling alone, he had experienced a total of 3.5 years. When they first received their fauna, Mika was 12 years old, Ermid was 10, and Meli was 14. After all this time, Mika was nearing 16, Ermid was 12, and Meli was 16. They were still far from reaching their physical peak. If they were to accept the Holy Sword's protection in their current state, it would be a difficult decision for Mika. By the way, I heard that Ermid wants to grow taller. Mika suddenly asked, remembering a certain rumor. Gabriel rolled her eyes and replied with a hint of exasperation, Meli must have told you that, didn't she? Hee. Mika chuckled, refusing to betray Meli. Seeing this, Gabriel sighed and said, it's true. Her maximum height potential is quite short. She's practically a legal loli. So, she came to me, hoping to find a way to grow taller. And is there a way? Mika asked curiously. Of course there is. Gabriel replied confidently. As an enhancement type NAN user, as long as she's willing and has sufficient knowledge of the human body, she can definitely increase her height through training. So it's NAN. Upon hearing Gabriel's words, Mika suddenly recalled a certain young girl from the Hunter x Hunter world. Biscuit Kruger. Despite her youthful appearance, once she revealed her true form, she transformed into a muscular giant over 2 meters tall. The thought of Ermid potentially achieving such a physique sent shivers down Mika's spine. No, I must warn Ermid and prevent her from developing that kind of body. Seeing Mika's sudden discomfort, Gabriel asked curiously, Mika, what's wrong? Mika then explained Biscuit Kruger's situation from the Hunter x Hunter world to Gabriel. Now, both of them were visibly disturbed. Ermid wouldn't actually develop that kind of body, would she? Mika asked nervously. I don't think so either, Gabriel replied, her voice laced with uncertainty. Both Mika and Gabriel's faces twitched slightly, unwilling to face the horrifying possibility. Chapter 94 Level Up, NAN Beasts. Unable to accept Ermid's new physique, Mika and Gabriel rushed to her room and showered her with a barrage of advice. Only then, as Ermid stared back at them in bewilderment, did they finally retreat. Time dedicated to learning always seemed to pass swiftly. 1 month after the conclusion of the Holy Grail War, Merlin returned to the Matu residence with Artoria in tow. During their journey, they not only fulfilled the task of assisting Kiritsugu Emiya in retrieving Ilia but also embarked on a leisurely tour of Britain. Witnessing the current state of her homeland, Artoria's once restless heart found a semblance of peace. It seems my approach was quite effective after all, Mika remarked with a playful smirk. I always said that Artoria's stubborn wish was simply the product of her overthinking during her idle moments. A change of scenery was bound to do her some good. Artoria's face darkened as she glared at Mika, who sat on the sofa, teasing her with a nonchalant air. With a huff, she turned and headed upstairs. Over the past few months, she had developed a close friendship with Ermit and Melly. Therefore, despite having just returned, she sought refuge in their company, unwilling to remain in the same room as the two men. Is she angry? Mika asked with a chuckle. Probably, Merlin replied, exchanging a knowing glance with Mika before they both burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. Hearing their boisterous laughter from downstairs, Artoria clenched her fists, her annoyance growing. How infuriating! Downstairs, after their laughter subsided, Mika and Merlin settled into the sofa and began conversing. Through Merlin's recounting, Mika mentally retraced their journey. By the way, Kiritsugu asked me to give you this. Merlin handed Mika a long, cloth-wrapped object. What is this? Unwrapping the white cloth, Mika's eyes widened as he saw Artoria's noble phantasm, Avalon. I never expected this noble phantasm to return. Mika shook his head and chuckled softly. He envied the power of Avalon, but it was not a noble phantasm he could assimilate. Bound by his contracts and oaths ability, Mika was unable to convert weapons that formed bonds with specific individuals. Perhaps it's his way of expressing gratitude for your assistance to his family. He decided to gift you this relic. Although it's not particularly useful to me, I appreciate his sentiment. Rewrapping Avalon in the white cloth and placing it beside him, Mika turned to Merlin, his expression growing serious. Now that you've returned, Merlin, our next task is to purify the Holy Grail, correct? Indeed. According to Gabriel's plan, that is our next objective. Merlin couldn't help but shake his head at the thought. To be honest, the task itself isn't as difficult as one might imagine. However, the process is incredibly tedious. I haven't even begun, yet I can already feel a headache coming on. Seeing Merlin's troubled expression, Mika placed a hand on his shoulder reassuringly. I'll leave it to you, then. 6 months had passed since the conclusion of the Holy Grail War. During this time, Mika and his companions dedicated themselves to training, achieving remarkable progress. Ermit and Melly experienced the most significant growth. After spending 3 months in the Type Moon world and undergoing rigorous training within, they finally reached their limits and achieved a level up. They evolved from level 2 adventurers to level 3 adventurers. This transformation brought about a substantial increase in their overall strength. Before their level up, both Ermit and Melly had reached the limits of all their basic abilities. In addition, Ermit had surpassed her limits in both strength and endurance, while Melly had achieved a breakthrough in her magic stat. Upon leveling up, they both acquired new magic. Name, Ermit Tzanare. Level, LV.3. Stats, Strength, I0 Endurance, I0 Dexterity, I0 Agility, I0 Magic, I0. Development Abilities, Mystery Age Healing I. Magic. Dia Fertel. Faraway Utopia. Barrier Magic. Isolates the space within the barrier from the outside world. Heals those protected by the barrier. Skills. Sharing Will and Woe. Ermit's newly awakened magic was directly influenced by Avalon. After Merlin returned Avalon, Mika placed it within Ermit's body for her to study. Perhaps due to Ermit's inherent desire to protect her companions, as she persistently attempted to replicate Avalon's power using her Nen abilities, she eventually awakened a remarkably similar magic. Melly's growth mirrored Ermit's. Name, Melly Ambrosius. Level, LV.3. Stats, Strength, I0 Endurance, I0 Dexterity, I0 Agility, I0 Magic, I0. Development Abilities, Mystery G Magic I. Magic. Hero Creation. Dream Prison. Eternally Isolated Utopia. Flower Barrier. Transforms all inanimate objects within the barrier into flower petals. Allows for spatial movement within the barrier. Skills. Illusion. Mental Manipulation Technique. Allows for mental intrusion. Projects illusions into reality. Compared to Ermid, Melly's progress was even more remarkable. In addition to awakening a new magic, she also gained a new skill. Both of these abilities originally belonged to Merlin. This phenomenon was due to the unique connection between Melly and her otherworldly counterpart, Merlin. It was similar to the relationship between Shiro Emiya and the heroic spirit Emiya. Emiya's existence was the culmination of Shiro Emiya's relentless refinement of his skills, reaching their peak before his death. Therefore, the gap between their abilities wasn't something that could be easily bridged by a few decades of experience. However, if the two were to engage in combat, Shiro Emiya could rapidly develop his skills to match Emiya's level. Even without combat, simply being in close proximity to Emiya would accelerate Shiro's skill development exponentially. This was one of the unique aspects of the Type Moon world, the transference of experience. The relationship between Melly and Merlin was similar. When learning other forms of magecraft, Melly displayed the aptitude of an ordinary genius. However, when it came to mastering Merlin's unique techniques, her learning speed was nothing short of extraordinary. Thus, following the Holy Grail War, Ermid and Melly inherited the noble phantasms of Artoria and Merlin, the master and apprentice duo, respectively. From a certain perspective, they could be considered a perfect couple. Their connection was something that even Mika envied. Why haven't I inherited anyone's noble phantasm? Hey? I've run out of magic slots? Never mind, then. Both Mika and Gabriel were overjoyed by Ermid and Melly's growth. After all, they were their cherished companions. However, perhaps influenced by other factors, neither Ermid nor Melly's newly awakened magic required incantations. This was completely unheard of within the Fauna system. Yet, it had undeniably occurred. Perhaps this is a miracle born from the collision of different power systems, Mika mused upon learning of this phenomenon. In addition to their new magic, Ermid and Melly also gained new development abilities. Ermid acquired healing, while Melly gained magic. These abilities respectively enhanced Ermid's healing prowess and Melly's magical capabilities. They were the most fitting development abilities for each of them. As for Melly's newly awakened skill? Initially, Melly speculated that the illusion skill's mental intrusion aspect might overlap with her dream prison magic. However, after conducting practical tests, she discovered that the illusion skill's mental intrusion actually enhanced the capabilities of dream prison. Not only did it make controlling dream prison easier, but it also increased its versatility and effectiveness. As for the ability to project illusions into reality, it expanded Melly's range of manipulation options and further refined her techniques. In short, both Ermid and Melly experienced an epic power surge during this level up. Furthermore, their 6 months of dedicated training significantly increased their latent aura capacity, which in turn boosted their Nen abilities considerably. Compared to Ermid and Melly's advancements, Mika's progress seemed somewhat less impressive. After all, Mika's power system had already been established, making exponential growth less likely. Unless he leveled up or acquired abilities that transcended his current system. For example, the 5 great magics of the Type Moon universe. During these 6 months of training, Mika had successfully developed his new Nen ability, the ability to transform spirits into Nen beasts. He named this ability Angel Transformation. As a member of the Yahweh Familia, Mika felt it was entirely appropriate to call his Nen beasts angels. After all, he, Michael, was an archangel himself, chuckles. Along with the birth of this new ability, Mika finally recognized his limitations. He had reached the maximum number of Nen abilities he could currently possess. Perhaps with each level up, this limit would gradually increase. However, those increases would be relatively minor. According to Mika's estimations, a significant expansion of his upper limit wouldn't occur until he reached level 6 and underwent a complete transformation. Besides this realization, Mika hadn't made any other significant, noticeable progress. Of course, this referred to readily apparent advancements. In less conspicuous areas, Mika's growth remained substantial. His latent aura capacity had increased dramatically. His martial arts skills had improved considerably. His basic stats had also been steadily rising through N training. These improvements weren't immediately obvious. However, as fundamental components of Mika's combat strength, they significantly impacted his overall power. The increased aura capacity enhanced his stamina and endurance in normal situations. His improved martial arts skills expanded his repertoire of combat techniques. While Mika's martial arts prowess was already impressive, his fighting style, based on the swordsmanship of Demon Slayer, was still far from reaching the pinnacle of the Type Moon world, the realm of the gods. This was a realm that even among heroic spirits, only a select few from the age of gods could attain. Mika yearned to reach this level. Therefore, after observing the servants' martial arts during the Holy Grail War, Gabriel began imparting more profound martial arts knowledge to Mika and the others. This led to a significant transformation in their fighting styles. Thus, the improvement in Mika's martial arts undoubtedly had a profound impact on his overall strength. Finally, the enhancement of his basic stats was even more crucial for Mika. During his 3 months in the dungeon, Mika's most prominent stat, endurance, had already reached rank E. During his battle against Gilgamesh, where he unleashed the suicidal attack Heavenly Fire, Annihilation, his endurance had surged to rank D. At that point, he had qualified for a level up. Therefore, after defeating Dire Muid, Mika had accumulated sufficient achievements to fulfill the requirements for his next level. Even though his victory over Dire Muid had been relatively easy, it was largely due to Merlin's enhancements and blessings, as well as Gabriel's magical support. In a sense, that battle had been more of a team effort against Dire Muid. However, as a direct participant, Mika had earned enough achievements to justify his level up. Therefore, he no longer needed to concern himself with selecting achievements. He simply needed to accumulate them. For Mika, increasing his fauna level was the most significant form of advancement. Are the defensive measures in place? Standing within the vast cavern at the heart of Mount Enzu, Mika addressed Gabriel and Merlin, who were returning from their work with cheerful expressions. Rest assured, everything is complete, Merlin replied, pumping his fist excitedly. For someone who valued freedom as much as he did, being confined to a single location for an extended period was incredibly tedious. Mika was surprised he had managed to endure it for 6 months. So, all that's left is to wait, correct? Precisely. With her hands on her hips, Gabriel floated in midair, her voice laced with a hint of disdain. To accommodate this restless fellow, after 6 months of in-depth analysis and a thorough understanding of the Holy Grail system, we've created an automated purification device. As a dedicated purification device for the Holy Grail, we no longer need to remain here and maintain the process manually. Consider it my liberation from this tedious task. Gabriel's face broke into a bright smile. Mika nodded in agreement. He had complete faith in the device created through the combined efforts of Gabriel's crafting skills and Merlin's magecraft. After all, it was a masterpiece meticulously designed by 2 brilliant minds, driven by their desire to free themselves from a monotonous chore. Can we trust the defensive measures? Don't worry, I've transformed this place into a magical stronghold. It's equipped with an automatic detection system that will permanently trap anyone who harbors malicious intent towards this location, Merlin explained with a sinister grin. However, if someone stumbles upon this place accidentally, I can guide them back safely. After all, I can remotely control this area. That's reassuring. Mika gazed at the Holy Grail in the distance, a faint smile playing on his lips. It's been over 6 months since we arrived here. After such a long time, it's time for us to return home. Chapter 95 Going Back to Danmachi, Iron Knight title. After the Holy Grail's purification process entered its automated phase, Mika had the idea of returning to Danmachi world. Their experiences in the Type Moon world had been invaluable for their growth. However, they had reached a point where their strength progression had slowed. Rather than idling their time, they might as well embark on a journey to a new world or perhaps cause some chaos in the dungeon. Ermit and Melly readily agreed. After all, they had remained relatively inactive in this world for 6 months. As adventurers who thrived on combat and gained experience through constant battles, it was commendable that they had endured such a long period of peaceful training. Of course, Mika wouldn't leave without making proper arrangements. For instance, he would connect the mana supply to the Holy Grail, using its purified magical energy to sustain Merlin and Artoria's presence in the physical world. If they were to vanish due to a lack of mana, Mika would suffer a significant loss. During their absence, Merlin and Artoria would travel to the Clock Tower in London, assisting Waver in establishing his own classroom. When Kenneth was sent back to the Clock Tower, the entire magical community was in an uproar. No one had anticipated that a Lord of the Clock Tower, a figure of immense prestige, would suffer such a humiliating defeat. Moreover, Kenneth's inherited magic crest was severely damaged. In addition, the valuable mystic codes he had acquired through loans for the Holy Grail War were destroyed by Kiritsugu Emiya's bombing. As a result, Kenneth was plunged into crippling debt. The entire El Meloy faction descended into chaos. With Kenneth losing his magecraft abilities, his classroom was abandoned. Finally, after a 6-month journey, Waver, who had recently returned, purchased the classroom. And he did so with Mika's money. For Mika, money wasn't a concern. After all, he had acquired numerous valuable materials and precious metals from other worlds. Selling these items strategically could easily generate a substantial fortune. As for why Mika supported Waver's purchase of Kenneth's classroom, it was out of necessity. Waver possessed an exceptional talent for teaching. His students were all exceptionally gifted individuals. Therefore, Voyager could utilize the classroom to cultivate more outstanding members for Mika's familia. The Yahweh familia's branch in the Type Moon world would flourish under his guidance. Now that everything was on track, only time was needed to propel their plans forward. Thus, Mika decided to seize the opportunity and return to Danmachi world. After all, he still had numerous tasks to accomplish in the Type Moon world in the future. Welcome back. With a flash of light, Mika and his 3 companions reappeared in Yahweh's bedroom. As Gabriel merged with Yahweh, the goddess awoke from her slumber. Welcome back, Mika, Ermid, Melly. Yahweh's face was filled with a warm smile as she absorbed Gabriel's memories of their time in the Type Moon world. The Holy Grail War, a battle royale between heroic spirits, a wish-granting device. Such a fascinating world. Indeed, it was quite interesting, Melly chimed in. After the Holy Grail War concluded, Mika, Ermid, and Melly continued their training while occasionally embarking on journeys to explore the world. For Mika, the purpose of travel was to learn new techniques, witness breathtaking landscapes, and forge meaningful friendships. These experiences enriched his life and broadened his horizons. As Mika listened to Melly and Yahweh exchanging stories, a knock echoed from the front gate. It seems we have a visitor. I'll go see who it is. With a brief announcement, Mika headed towards the gate. Opening the gate, he was greeted by the sight of a burly man dressed in a conspicuous outfit. It's you, Udo. Shouldn't you be patrolling the streets? What brings you here? Mika was somewhat familiar with the man before him, a member of the Ganesha familia. The Ganesha familia was currently ranked 3rd among all the familias in Orario, following only the Freya and Loki familias. They also held the title of city's military police. Through his experiences over the years, Mika had gained a deeper understanding of Orario. This understanding was no longer based solely on the fragmented information he had gathered previously. It was a comprehension forged through first-hand experiences and observations. Firstly, the conclusion. The current Orario and the Orario of the future were vastly different, save for their architectural style. The current Orario was in the midst of a dark age. Mika's previous understanding of the Dark Age had been superficial. Only after experiencing it firsthand could he truly grasp its brutal nature. During this period, adventurers not only had to battle monsters in the dungeon but also contend with adventurers from the dark factions. Ever since the Zeus and Hera familias suffered a catastrophic defeat in their expedition to slay the Black Dragon, their main forces nearly annihilated, the balance of power in Orario had shifted dramatically. With the 2 familias that had maintained order for over a millennium reduced to ashes, the dark factions, previously suppressed and confined to the fringes of Orario, surged forth from the shadows. They wreaked havoc throughout the city, engaging in indiscriminate killings, destroying goods, setting fire to granaries and buildings. They employed every imaginable underhanded tactic to sow chaos and destruction. It was the Freya and Loki familias who rose to confront them. Under the leadership of these 2 powerful familias, various other familias joined the fight, relentlessly pursuing the dark factions, determined to eradicate them completely. After years of fierce battles, the dark factions' offensive gradually weakened, forcing them to retreat back into the shadows. This brought a semblance of peace to Orario. However, the current familias lacked the overwhelming power of the former Zeus and Hera familias to completely suppress the dark factions. The dark factions had merely shifted their battleground from open confrontation to the shadows. Even now, within the darkest corners of Orario, adventurers from various familias continued to clash with those from the dark factions. Because the dark factions' attacks had become covert, constant vigilance was necessary throughout the city. The Ganesha familia shouldered this responsibility. Within the Ganesha familia, there was also a prison. In the current Orario, the major familias, led by the Freya and Loki familias, were akin to a standing army, ready to quell any uprising from the dark factions. The Ganesha familia, on the other hand, served as the police force, maintaining order and protecting the city. This was why they were known as the city's military police. As the city's military police, the Ganesha familia had the authority to request assistance from other familias in times of crisis. And that was precisely why they had sought out Mika. Iron Knight, according to... Stop. Mika quickly raised his hand, interrupting Udo's words. Please don't call me by that title. He said firmly. It had been a year and a half since Mika had become an adventurer. Just before their departure to the Type Moon world, Mika, Ermid, and Melly had reported to the guild. They had all achieved level 2. This news didn't cause much of a stir in Orario. After all, a year and a half was considered a relatively average time frame for talented adventurers to reach level 2. Upon seeing the guild's announcement, most adventurers simply acknowledged their accomplishment with a nod of approval before moving on. And that was precisely the effect Mika had desired. However, reaching level 2, transitioning from a novice to an intermediate adventurer, brought about two significant changes for Mika and his companions. Firstly, they gained access to higher-level guild quests and were officially recognized as combatants. In the ongoing struggle against the dark factions, level 2 adventurers were the true backbone of the resistance. Without level 2 strength, one didn't even have the qualifications to participate in this war. Level 2 adventurers were the pillars of both sides in this conflict between light and darkness. Level 3 and Level 4 adventurers, considered second tier, served as officers, each possessing considerable renown. As for Level 5 adventurers and above, they were undoubtedly the trump cards of both sides. While Level 1 adventurers from larger familias might join the fray, they primarily handled logistical and support roles. Tasks like patrolling the city were typically assigned to Level 1 adventurers from the Ganesha familia. Secondly, they were granted titles. Whenever an adventurer reached level 2 and became an intermediate adventurer, the gods would bestow upon them a title to commemorate their bravery. Unlike the gods of the future, who were carefree and enjoyed leisurely pursuits, the current gods, despite their playful nature, were actively involved in the ongoing conflict with the dark factions and exercised restraint in their behavior. They typically assigned titles based on an adventurer's achievements, reputation, or appearance. Thus, as adventurers with unremarkable achievements and no particular fame, Mika and his companions received rather ordinary titles. Mika, who often donned a full suit of armor, a rarity among adventurers, was dubbed the Iron Knight. Meli, with her proficiency in spirit magic, was given the title True Eye of the Evil King. And Ermid, with her delicate features, was called the Doll Girl. Upon learning their titles from Yahweh, Mika and his companions were filled with despair. The cringe was unbearable. These titles were simply too embarrassing. In the end, they made a pact to never mention each other's titles again. However, that didn't stop others from using them. Why, Mika? Iron Knight sounds so cool. Udo even mimicked a sword swing, further exacerbating Mika's embarrassment. If this were modern society, it would be a social death sentence. Enough, please. Let's just get on with your message, Mika pleaded. He was acquainted with Udo. He had first encountered him during his initial visit to the city. Later, they often crossed paths on their way to and from the dungeon, exchanging greetings. Over time, they became acquaintances. Oh, right. I almost forgot, Udo said, his expression turning serious. This summons is for all three of you. We require your assistance in patrolling this area. Udo pulled out a map and circled their designated patrol zone. A full mobilization? What's going on? Mika asked, puzzled. Udo didn't hesitate to explain. Recently, there have been signs of renewed activity from the dark factions. Over the past few days, they have attacked several shops, and there are indications that these attacks might escalate. The guild suspects that the dark factions intend to shatter the fragile peace we've managed to establish. Therefore, the guild has mobilized all level 2 adventurers in Orario to prepare for a potential offensive from the dark factions. Is it starting again? Meli sighed as she stepped out into the courtyard. No wonder the streets felt so deserted yesterday. It's because of the dark factions. Because of them, the entire city's security is on the verge of collapse. What do you mean? Meli asked, concerned by Udo's grim tone. With so many shops destroyed, countless citizens have lost their jobs. In such dire circumstances, they can't find any means to support themselves. As a result, many who were once good-hearted have been driven to commit crimes out of desperation. After all, people will die if they don't eat, especially those with families to feed. Therefore, the commercial familias, especially those focused on agriculture, are discussing the possibility of distributing emergency rations throughout Orario. Udo shook his head, his face edged with sadness. The Ganesha familia's prison is overflowing with criminals. And these are the very people we are supposed to protect. Mika and his companions fell silent, absorbing Udo's words. They hadn't realized the severity of the situation in Orario. Criminals, refugees, desperate citizens, adventurers locked in deadly combat, deserted streets. These grim realities, starkly different from the Orario they remembered, painted a vivid picture of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of the Dark Age. According to Mika's memories, the Great Feud and the 7 Days of Death, events he knew existed but had no specific details about, were only 6 months to a year away. That would be the most brutal period of this conflict. I understand. So, when do we start, Udo? Tomorrow. Tomorrow? Don't worry, we won't be late. Mika placed a reassuring hand on Udo's shoulder, offering a sincere promise. We're counting on you, Mika. I'm just too weak. I wish I could join the fight too. Despite knowing Udo for a long time, he was still a level 1 adventurer. His daily duties consisted of patrolling the streets, delivering messages, and securing crime scenes. Then you'll have to work hard and level up quickly. Mika encouraged with a smile.
Thanks for listening.